Hello, this is Storybooks channel. New videos are posted every day. Subscribe and click the bell.
It had been raining nonstop since the previous evening, but despite the bad weather, customers were coming to the pharmacy in a steady stream. Aunt Miranda had to keep running to the back room to change the water. No sooner had she returned to the sales floor after another change than the door was slammed loudly, and a man in a raincoat and rubber boots rushed to the business without a prescription. The elderly cleaning lady barely had time to move the bucket out of the way. "Where are you going?" The visitors looked at the woman confusedly, but said nothing. But Aunt Miranda didn't miss the opportunity to get wise. They're running around like crazy. They can't be bothered with the rain. This isn't a store called a bodega. It's a commercial pharmacy. I'd introduce special passes. It'd be a real, orderly place. Jenna appeared behind a tall glass partition. "Aunt Miranda, you're scaring all our customers with your reasoning. If we put a security check in place, you and I will be out of a paycheck." Jenna, only a few months out of medical school, held herself as if she had at least 5 years of practical experience. She turned to the man with the water streaming down her arm. "Listening to you," the customer began inarticulately to explain to the girl the problem for which he had ventured out of the house in such a downpour. Then he took a wet piece of paper out of his pocket and stuck it in the window. "I was told it would help." Jenna grimaced, but took the piece of paper with 2 fingers. "Man, this drug is available by prescription only. Go to the clinic. Let the doctor write you a prescription." The cleaning lady was already preparing to clean up the newly formed puddle from the coffee floor. But the man was still standing at the window. He was desperate. "Young lady, is there any substitute? This medicine is not for me. It's for my mother. She doesn't walk." The girl was annoyed with the client, and she answered him in a raised intonation. "And there are rules of release, medications, and I must comply with them. Are you advised to call a cab to take your mom to a medical facility or doctor's home? Call one." The man raised his voice too. "So he was our district doctor today and left this paper. He said he had run out of forms." The young woman blushed. "Man, unfortunately, I can't help you. It's a prescription drug." Aunt Miranda was already there. Wanted to escort the pushy little man out. But Betty, the pharmacist, showed up in the sales room. She gave Jenna an expressive look and then turned to the man who was ready to cry. "Please don't worry, we'll try to solve your problem." The visitor began to emotionally explain the essence of his problem. She listened to him very attentively. When the man spoke out in the same pacifying, strong voice, she said, "We will try to help you in your situation. I can recommend you this remedy." The woman took out a small package from the showcase and handed it to the buyer. "The drug has a similar effect, is available without a prescription, and is inexpensive." The man took the medicine and asked with hope in his voice, "And it will help my mom?" "If everything is as you described, it should help. Although the composition is slightly different, but still try to consult your doctor." The man paid and hurriedly left the pharmacy. Aunt Miranda looked at Jenna condescendingly. "If you talk to customers like that, we'll get complaints. This is a pharmacy, not a vegetable store." Miranda was very pleased with herself. She grabbed the mop with excitement, but Jenna spoiled her mood a little. "Aunt Miranda, you're wrong." She even stopped breathing. "Betty, what's wrong with me, Betty? Listen to you." "So it's okay to be rude to customers at the vegetable store." The elderly worker was embarrassed. It was not hard to guess from her tense face how hard her brain was working. Betty took pity on the unfortunate woman. He gave her a friendly pat on the shoulder. "Don't take offense, Miranda. I didn't mean any offense. You're doing a great job, but even a good worker can't stoop to rudeness. That's true of any service area." Jenna headed for the storage section, which the pharmacy staff called the warehouse. Aunt Miranda was still under the impression of words. A smart woman and would never raise her voice. Jenna, with obvious arrogance, remarked Aunt Miranda, "If you had learned in your time, you wouldn't have to mop the floors now." The cleaning lady responded instantly to the girl's outburst. "I lived in a country where any labor was honored. And I finished technical school, as you put it at the time, and worked at a large enterprise. Then the innovators came in and closed the fucking doors. so I had to take a rag in my hands. But I'm not offended by fate because I don't consider my work a humiliation. Somebody has to clean up too. Miranda began to scrub the floor with exasperation for the second time that day. Jenna watched her through the glass with a smirk on her face. By lunchtime, the rain had stopped, but there were no more customers. So Aunt Miranda decided to take a little break. She sat down on a couch designed for the convenience of visitors and fell asleep unnoticed. But the cleaner did not have time to relax completely because she was brought back to reality by the voice of the manager. "Girls, I'm running away to the meeting. In my absence, you can a little. You outrage, but do not get too carried away." Lutogo assessed the situation in the hall and then turned to the young employee. "Jenna, you are very lucky. Betty is an expert. She's one of our best. By the way, it's her birthday today, if I'm not mistaken." And with the warehouse door open, Jenna's voice was heard. "Christina, you have a phenomenal memory. How do you keep everything in your head?" The boss was flattered by the praise, as evidenced by her smile. "I've had this ability since childhood. I solved all the problems in my mind at school. Okay, girls, I'm off. You can have tea, but everything within the bounds of propriety." Jenna has assured the management. "Christina, I know you know me, Betty, and I appreciate it. I'll tell you in confidence that I recommended you for my position." Jenna was surprised. "Are you leaving us? Maybe I'll get a promotion soon, but it's too early to beat the drums. So please do not spread this information." It was noticeable that the manager had just recently learned about the probable changes in her career, and joy overflowed her. She waved goodbye once more and disappeared behind the door. Miranda headed for the back room. "I'm going to put the kettle on and I'll run to the store for a cake." Jenna left her cloak and followed her boss out into the street. Jenna saw how she stopped the loot when she was getting into the car and said something to her. The supervisor, listening to her, nodded her head. The girl moved away from the window, but the unpleasant thought did not leave her head. It's like this everywhere, at home and at college. Now everyone here teaches, thinks they're the smartest. And this aunt makes a Plato out of herself, but she's a Chechen. Jenna didn't seem to know what class and species this Chechen belonged to. She put everyone who looked gray and shabby and dressed primitively into this group. Betty had no idea that her young colleague had already managed to categorize her. She returned from the store with a dressed-up box and cheerfully said to the girl Jenna, "While we have a lull, let's cover the doors for 15 minutes will do." The girl put up a sign, closed for technical reasons, and walked to a room where the staff could take a break and change. Miranda had already managed to set the table and was waiting for the kettle to boil to brighten up those minutes. She decided to talk about her previous place of employment. "Before you, I did floors in the prosecutor's office. At first, it was scary to even go into that office, but gradually I got used to it. We often treated her there together, and I want to say that the people working there are normal. True, they never talked business in front of me, and they never left me alone in the offices." Jenna drew the cake. No surprise there. Increased security measures are never unnecessary. By the way, the pharmacy should have the same, strictest rules. "That's what they told us in college." Jenna gave the girl a quick glance. "That's right. Every business has its rules." The kettle's electrode boiled. "Did you, Miranda, unplug the appliance? Girls are boring. We're on a theme. On your birthday, you're supposed to sing songs and have fun." An old woman sang an happy birthday to love to the point of giddiness. What's new? Mood, the old lady's impromptu, and got Jenna excited. "Aunt Miranda, you're a sweetheart." Betty also thanked the woman for her extraordinary greeting, unexpected and very nice. "Thank you, Miranda's treat. The three of us need to destroy this cake." Miranda winked at Jenna. "That's not gonna be the end of it. I've had a sweet tooth since I was a kid. I've had such a good figure." The woman stroked her rounded sides and continued. "Sweets, like love, always want to repeat." Jenna laughed. "I didn't think that at this age people think about love relationships. My girl, age is no barrier to that. Take my husband, for example. He'll be 70 soon, and he's still thinking about it. In the spring, he'll be ripe. He's looking at girls in short skirts racing. When he was younger, He used to make such races that I had to use physical force. He once had an affair with a cashier at our store, and they had nowhere to meet, so he decided to turn the garage into a date spot. I was sniffing about that. Aunt Miranda threw herself on the back of a chair and burst out laughing. Benjamin and Jeannie waited patiently for the story to continue. When the fit of laughter passed, the cleaning lady wiped her tears with her hand. I'm laughing now, but I didn't laugh then. I caught them at the most crucial moment. My eyes went black and I was pounding. I learned later, when I started working in the prosecutor's office, that it's called affect. Jenna thought it was. Aunt Miranda looked at the girl in amazement. It would have been a lot to take in, but it was a good lesson. I grabbed the first iron in my hands and went to the cashier. And she was like a beast, counting in her own voice. And into the street. It was still light. And the men in the neighboring garages were fixing their cars. They saw a slightly dressed woman running and didn't understand anything at first. Then my family jumped out. I drove him all the way up the driveway like that. I only let the iron out of my hands in the apartment. The next morning, I wanted to put it away. I couldn't. The thing was too heavy. I still wonder how I could run more than a kilometer with it. Jenna's eyes were burning with curiosity. Aunt Miranda, what about your husband? How's he doing? He didn't. For a long time. I discouraged him from going left with his eyes. He still does it now, but he's less afraid of getting angry. Miranda took a breath. We're going in the wrong direction, Betty. On this day, from the bottom of my heart, I want to wish you love and happiness, so that you never have to wrestle your husband from the clutches of an evil student. I'm kidding, of course. A woman like you, Betty, and a husband like you have an exemplary husband. Jenna thanked the woman profusely for her wishes. But Aunt Miranda's story had been on her mind all day. She tried to imagine herself in Miranda's shoes, but her imagination refused to work in that direction, and the inner voice persistently advised her not to make a big deal out of herself. Nick had never once given you any reason to suspect him of cheating. So the cleaning lady is right. He's a model husband. Psychologists say that people quickly get used to a certain way of life. Betty valued the comfort and peace of home more than anything else. After work, she hurried home to be in the familiar comfort of a tea party in the company of women, and she wanted to share this warmth with her husband. On her way home, she stopped by the store, where she spent a decent amount of money. Though this fact made the woman a little embarrassed. She mentally reassured herself, it's okay, it's a day. Births only come once a year, so my wastefulness is justified. I will cook a delicious dinner and have a romantic evening for myself and Nick. With the same mood, the woman opened the apartment door, but immediately froze with surprise, because incredible aromas were coming from the kitchen. She whispered "Robber" ahead of me. Betty threw off her boots and looked for her slippers, but they weren't there. Nick, what kind of joke is this? I mean, my slippers back home. But instead of my husband, Kate came out of the kitchen. Mom, Olechka, happy birthday. And I decided to give you and Daddy a little surprise. I hope I succeeded. Kate ran up, clutching her in her arms. And Betty started begging her daughter crazy, let go. I didn't expect you to be on edge today, the girl remarked contentedly, so the surprise was a success. I've decided to commit to cooking dinner. I hope you, not offended by my self-indulgence, will not be offended. But how did you manage to get away in the middle of the week? You said you had midterms coming up and little time to prepare. Betty followed her daughter into the kitchen and looked around the room. Kate noticed her mother's confused look and tried to reassure her. I made a little mess, but I'll fix it, I promise. And my sudden appearance in the house is very simple. I took a week off. I could tell by the look in the woman's daughter's eyes that she was lying. Kate, spit it out. Your eyes always let you down. The girl again smacked, but to break and in a guilty voice said the mother. How do you manage to reveal everything on the fly? Well, yes, I a little bit tricked, pretended to be sick, but it's all for a higher purpose. I wanted to make you happy. Betty turned from anger to grace. Oh, thank you. Did you make it? Well, I got a congratulations at work today, too. Aunt Miranda, the janitor, even sang for the occasion. You see, there are times in life when you have to change the rules. These moments are called exceptions. Make sure your adventure doesn't have dire consequences. Mom, I'm not a dumb chicken. I'll have an exculpatory document. That is, a certificate from the clinic. Oh, I almost forgot. I have a present for you. Kate ran out into the hallway, but came right back in. She handed her mother a small sack tied in red. Mammy, this is not an easy sack. The girl untied the letter and took out a souvenir. I bought this thing from a woman in the market. She told me it's a strong amulet for the house. Let's find a cozy place for it together. Betty liked her daughter's gift very much, and with childlike enthusiasm, she began to look for a suitable place for the souvenir. Kate, I think the woman placed the gift on a small shelf above the dining room table. Kate approved of the choice. Awesome. The process of cooking dinner went unchecked, and the pleasant aroma overpowered the noxious smell of burning. Kate rushed to the stove. Well, all my efforts are for naught. The girl's voice sounded desperate, and tears came to her eyes. Betty was surprised at such a reaction. Xusha should not be so upset. Now you and I will fix everything. The mother took the reins of the cooking process into her own hands, and the daughter did not resist it. She obeyed Betty's commands, but her mood dropped noticeably when dinner was almost ready. The girl guided her mother's neck with her hands. Mommy, I'm sorry. What happened? I was trying to do the best I could, and I don't know why I'm so bad at it. There was a note of despair in the girl's voice again, which surprised Kate's mother. There's no need to weep over every little thing. Was it the spoiled dinner that upset you so much? Or is there another reason for your tears? The girl wiped her tears and smiled crookedly. No, don't worry. I'm doing fine. She felt in her heart that her daughter had lied to her again. But she didn't pester her with questions, she thought. Kate will be 20 soon. Why would I interfere in her life? She'll want to ask for help herself. The thought had crossed her mind more than once. The first time it pricked, motherly heart. When Kate announced her decision to apply to a university in the capital, her parents hoped that their daughter would study in her hometown, where there were plenty of educational institutions. But Kate persisted. Dear parents, stop patronizing me. I'm not a little girl anymore, and I have every right to dispose of my life. Even birds and animals let their babies go free when the time comes. Nick was impressed by this comparison and agreed with his daughter. Okay, Mom and I won't clip your wings, but remember that we're always here for you. Betty was not in agreement with her husband's stance, though. She remained silent. She didn't want to destroy Nick's authority in her daughter's eyes. But when they were alone, the woman unleashed a barrage of accusations on her husband. You want to appear to be a good sack, and do not think about the consequences. Our daughter is a child. She is not used to independent life and can do such wonders. Nick let his wife speak. Then he said, remember yourself at 17, if memory serves. At that tender age, you also ran away from home because you were aggravated by life in a provincial town. By the way, at 19, you were already married to me. So our Kate had a whole year to herself. If we take your example as a model, it was a fair point. Betty didn't argue with her husband. She couldn't get used to the fact that her daughter lived far away from home for a long time and called her every day. The passions died down a bit. Only a year after the departure of her daughter, Kate came on big holidays. She also spent her vacations at home, but the girl never talked about her personal life. Only once the mother asked, "Are you dating anyone?" The girl immediately withdrew and discreetly replied, "Mom, I was the first to tell you about the changes in my personal life. So far, I have no progress in this regard, because the main thing for me now is studying." With this explanation, the daughter made it clear that further questioning was pointless. Many times, Betty broke through to break this unspoken ban. On the day of her birthday, she tried her hand at it too. When the festive table was set and they sat down to eat, Mother said sadly, "The day has come." But nothing terrible seemed to have happened. Kate furrowed her eyebrows in surprise. "Mom, what are you talking about? About dates? They say that after the age of 40, life starts to go downhill. It turns out I'm on a countdown starting today." "Mom, stop it. You're my youngest and prettiest. 40 is your prime. There's so much more you can do with your life." Betty picked up on it on the fly. "And what can I do that's so useful when you're all grown up?" It's all right, Mama, just be patient. There may be something for you to do very soon. Kate, you intrigue me. Tell me what you've been up to. The girl is blushing. I may be getting married soon. That's all I can tell you for now. At least tell me the name of your chosen one. Who is he? What does he do? Betty worried as if she were the one who was going to be married, not her daughter. But Kate deliberately delayed her answer. Only after a second question did she reluctantly give away her secret, his name Max. Preventing further questions, I will say that he is from the locals. But we study at the same institute. That's it. No more questions. All right, let's have dinner. I'm starving. Betty looked at the clock, which flowed peacefully on the wall next to the stick on which the souvenir already carried its watch. It's almost 8. I wonder where our father has disappeared to. Kate told me. You should call him for sure. I'm a little slow today, probably from an excess of joyful feelings. The woman dialed a familiar number, but no one answered. She grappled with the first explanation she could come up with. It must be a bad connection. Daddy's often sent out into the middle of nowhere where the connection is bad. Interesting facts I'm learning. How often does he have to recycle? I mean, it's 8 o'clock. All normal people stay home and watch TV. Kate, you know Dad. He thinks it's his duty to interfere with everything that concerns his work. Kate smirked. I'd agree with you if he worked in the mayor's office or the prosecutor's office. But what special business could an ordinary engineer at a woodworking company have? Betty wouldn't give up. It's responsible manufacturing, too. Dad said they'd almost doubled the number of customers lately, so he had to keep his head spinning. He's often late. Daughter, he grumbled on the day you were born. He could have shown up on time. I think we're waiting for him for nothing. The mood finally sank, and Betty said wistfully, perhaps it really is the daughter. There's no point in waiting for Daddy. Let's have dinner. The solemnity of the moment was gone. That's why the bottle of French champagne never appeared on the table. Mother and daughter ate in silence, and each was thinking about her own thoughts. Kate refused the sweet dessert and went straight to her room. You won't hurt Mommy if I leave you alone. Betty replied in a dull voice. What kind of silly questions are these? Are you tired from the road? Go and rest. I'll do the dishes myself, I think. The clock showed 9:45 p.m. when she realized that there was no point in waiting for her husband anymore. All sorts of thoughts were wandering in her head. So the woman birthed for a long time before falling into a restless sleep, woken by the pungent smell of booze. Her husband was sleeping serenely and a blissful smile was frozen on his face. Resentment came over her head again. He'd forgotten my birthday. He hadn't even bothered to congratulate me on the phone. Of course, my husband has better things to do, and his partners are closer to him than his own wife. She wanted to wake Nick up and confront him. She pulled her pillow from under his head, hoping her husband would wake up. But the man mumbled something unintelligible and rolled over onto his other side. Betty left the bedroom and spent the rest of the night on the couch in the living room. She thought about the fact that her house had been a warming bowl for years. Yesterday, that vessel had given its first crack. The awakening was painful, and for several minutes, Nick hesitated to open his eyes. The events of last night flashed in fragmentary episodes, and the man cursed half-heartedly. We shouldn't have had so much to drink. Now I'll suffer. With a tremendous effort, Avuli forced himself to rise from behind the cloudy gaze. Immediately, he stared at the electronic clock that was calculating the time on the nightstand. Damn it, it's almost 8:30. I'll be hung by one spot if I'm late. Nick is not an accident. In the first minutes after waking up, I remembered Martin. The mere name of this man gave most of the workers of the woodworking mill a temporary shiver. Some feared him, while others secretly hated their feelings. Both had to hide as they were afraid of losing their well-paying jobs. Only Benjamin could talk to the owner of the company on equal terms. Martin highly appreciated the merits of the chief engineer, who was the author of several rationalization proposals. For this, Bacco rewarded Nick with a ruble and at the same time noted with pleasure, "You have a bright head, Nick, but remember that if you sell everything to your competitors, you will be in trouble." Martin said all this in all seriousness, and then, after a short pause, burst out laughing. Yeah, I'm kidding. Thrash, soap operas, face. At first, Jenna was confused by this either praise or warning. But over time, he got used to his employer's unorthodox remarks. By the way, Martin also often visited Light Thoughts. Yesterday, on this very occasion, the businessman covered a glade for especially close persons. The evening was a free-for-all at Martin's country estate, but especially Jenna remembered, although he was quite tipsy. The final part involving the girls, Nick does not remember who delivered him home. His memory is only firmly carved from the word, or rather a sentence, which he voiced at the very beginning of the banquet. If you obey me, I'll appoint you director of a new factory. You may have heard I'm going to buy the workshops. The owner is practically bankrupt and is giving me the space for nothing. I've had an idea that's been on my mind for a while. I want to start manufacturing popular building materials. I've already ordered the equipment. Martin spent another 5 minutes talking about the prospects of his business. But in Nick's head, the system formed the thought, I will be the director of the new factory. This thought did not leave him. Throughout the evening, it warmed his heart even when he secluded himself with a strange girl in one of the rooms of Martin's palace. Nick shook his head determinedly, which helped bring him back from the previous evening to the present day. Only then did he notice the absence of a pillow on the neighboring half of the bed. This fact surprised the man, and he called out to his spouse in a husky voice, "Betty," but his faint call went unanswered. Present in the apartment silence, the man realized that his wife had already managed to run away to work. Charcot still in gait, he headed for the kitchen, where he volleyed away a whole bottle of kefir. Relief came almost instantly, and Nick decided to move on to the next phase of rapid sobering up. But the bathroom turned out to be locked from the inside. He knocked timidly. "Betty, you haven't left yet. Since when did you start locking yourself out?" The door swung open immediately. "Dad, Mom's been at work for a long time. And you're definitely going to be late today." The man stuttered in surprise. "Kate, what the hell are you doing here?" The girl slipped past the pop. Unlike some from my memory, did not blow out important information. Nick was puzzled by that statement. "Daughter, have I forgotten something? I'll remind you, if it's not too much trouble." "Yeah, Dad, your memory's a little fuzzy. Yesterday was Mom's birthday. It was her 40th birthday, by the way. She and I cooked a birthday dinner. We waited up till the middle of the night for you. Mom dialed you, but the phone was disconnected." Her daughter spoke to him in an inappropriate tone, and it angered the head of the family. "You shouldn't blame me, Kate. First of all, people say you can't celebrate your 40th birthday. And secondly, why do you talk to your father like that?" The girl smirked. "You don't like my tone. Fine, I'll keep my mouth shut. But when it's your birthday, I'll accidentally forget too. I don't really want you to feel what Mom felt yesterday." Kate slammed the door, making it clear that she didn't want to talk to her father anymore. Nick looked at the clock again and realized that he had no time left for a shower and breakfast. He had to limit himself to washing up and brushing his teeth. Trouble. Morning. To brighten Martin's absence a little. So his slight tardiness went unnoticed. Benjamin quickly got into work and no longer kept track of the time. On his way home, he stopped at a flower store. A young girl greeted him with a friendly smile. "Do you want a bouquet for your mom or for your girlfriend?" Benjamin cheerfully replied, "Advise which is more suitable for atonement of sins." The girl's eyelashes fluttered. "Oh, that's the first time I've heard such a request. But I think this floral arrangement fits your request." A luxurious bouquet of tea-colored roses cost the man a fortune. But he was sure that Betty would appreciate his efforts and forgive his forgetfulness. But his wife didn't want to accept the flowers from him. She said with a sneer, "Give this bouquet to the one you had fun with yesterday." This answer dumbfounded the man, and he left the flowers on the table, advising her to put the flowers in water. "I paid for this bouquet as much as it would cost for a dinner in a good restaurant to appreciate my husband's attention." Instead of the expected kiss, the woman scornfully repeated your gift inappropriately. To confirm her words, Betty carelessly waved the flowers at the bouquet, landing near the giver's feet. Trying to control his emotions, Nick picked up the flowers and looked reproachfully at his wife. "I admit I'm sorry, but the flowers had nothing to do with it." The woman defiantly turned away, and Benjamin realized that his wife didn't want to talk to him. Good, Betty relieved herself of her presence. The man picked up the bouquet and shouted already from the hallway without me. Nick felt insulted in his soul. Cola was rolling a volcano, and we bumped into each other. Why'd she make a big deal out of it? She's showing some character. Well, I'm gonna prove to you that I'm still worth something too. To ease the tension, the man went to the first bar he could find. After the initial portion of drink, he was a little released, and his thoughts were lined up in an even line. But the man did not have time to develop a strategy for further actions. He was interrupted by a slender blonde with huge brown eyes. The girl slowly approached the bar and left him with a languid look. I hope I'm not interrupting. Nick, do I know you? Benjamin stared at the blonde, trying to remember where he might have seen her. There was no doubt that they had met before, but he couldn't remember under what circumstances the acquaintance had taken place. The maiden was watching him, putting her lips prettily to her cocktail glass. She clearly enjoyed the man's confusion only completely, and putting the sushi in the glass she had practiced to perfection, she flipped her hair back and, in a heartfelt voice, informed Nick. I'm Kathy, Martin's daughter. You may have seen me at Daddy's factory. I've had the honor of being there a few times. It's just that I was wearing simple jeans and a t-shirt. My hair was different too. The man was glad for the clue. Oh, how do I remember? Were you still interested in the new composite tiles? Yes, I really liked the unconventional color. I generally love anything unusual, and I like that in men too. Kathy lowered her eyes, and Nick admired her delicate features. He liked this mysterious girl more and more with every passing minute, and his voice was hoarse with excitement. He asked, "Let me buy you a drink, Kathy. I can't when it's so official." Kathy's eyes rounded expressively again. Nick, are you ashamed to talk about your age? How old are you? 40. I'll be 45 soon. That's a man's prime. I'll be 30 soon. Don't look at me like that. Yeah, I know women don't like to give out their passport information. I'm not going to hide my age because it's stupid and ridiculous. He felt pleasantly dizzy from the drink, and the eyes of this extraordinary girl had a moment when he acutely wanted to surprise her with a daring act. But since nothing suitable came to mind, Nick remembered about the bouquet, which was waiting for its fate on a neighboring chair. He grabbed the flowers and, on one knee, held out the bouquet to Kathy. I can't talk pretty, but you're as lovely as these tea roses. The girl was thrilled at the recognition. Nick, you are super. You're the first man who's ever really surprised me. I'll let you order. Another cocktail for me. They sat in the bar until midnight, and Kathy was pretty drunk. He had to call a cab to evacuate the girl from the lost establishment. He got home at 2 o'clock in the morning. Trying not to make any noise, the man headed for the bedroom, but he was stopped by his daughter's voice. Daddy, Mom put you on the couch, she said, and she's not going to breathe the vapors of your libations one more night. I totally understand her. Kate laid it all out in a loud whisper and at the end added, How long were you out for? Not hiding his irritation, he replied, Not enough for you to make such remarks to me. I'm an adult and I do what I think is right. Kate snarled, Yeah, I don't really care how crazy you guys get around here. It's just that I have to leave early tomorrow morning. I was going to ask you to drive me to the train station. That's different. You can ask Daddy for things, but you can't tell him what to do. All right, kitten. If you'll take me early tomorrow, my daughter kicked me out to her room. And Nick began to get comfortable on the couch. Before falling into sleep, he remembered the previous evening and Kathy. Engrossed in pleasant thoughts, he did not notice how he burst out. I'd do anything for a girl like that. Realizing that he had made a mistake, the man even stopped breathing. But soon he realized that no one had heard his enthusiastic cry. Betty had gotten up early on purpose so that she could make provisions for Kate. The pharmacy opened at 8 o'clock, so she couldn't be late. Her husband was still asleep after his walk, so she walked silently past the couch. The most surprising thing was that she felt absolutely no emotion. It was the first time such a thing had happened to her, and a bad thought burned her consciousness. Had we grown so sick of each other in these 20 years that we didn't care about anything? That question hung in the kitchen space, because the unhappy housewives were interrupted by the arrival of her husband. Hi. Packing was in full swing. Nick was in good spirits and spoke as if it wasn't her ruined birthday, so as not to exacerbate the already heated atmosphere in the house. Betty indifferently replied, as you can see, "Gathering provisions. I hope you'll give Ikatha some money. My paycheck isn't until the end of the week." "Okay, I'll just check how much cash I have." The man rushed to the bedroom, but remembered that he had spent the night in a hotel. This fact caused a new surge of irritation. He muttered angrily, "I feel like a dog, thrown out on the street by the owners. I heard from the kitchen. Did you say something you heard?" He returned to the kitchen and handed his wife some bills. Hopefully, that would be enough for a third-year student. Betty put the money away in her desk drawer and asked with a sneer why such a tone this morning, or was last night not a success? On the contrary, it was great. I didn't even want to go home. I don't know why I deserve to be treated this way, and I warn you that I don't like sleeping on the couch. The woman parried, "I don't like to breathe your booze." Nick wanted to remind his wife that she lives in the apartment, which he inherited from his grandmother. Moreover, this real estate is not subject to division, because the grandmother still in her lifetime has formalized a gift. Spread on this topic, the man did not, because he did not want to add dry wood to the fire of a family scandal to at least somehow smooth out the awkward situation. He asked, "You will come with us, or without you the pharmacy cannot work." "I'm not going. I don't want us to have a fight at the train station." Betty didn't even look at him. She deftly packed and travel bagged Katie's daughter's luggage, is ready and go have breakfast before the road. "And I should be going now." Betty walked past her husband, who continued to stand plastered in the middle of the kitchen. She bade her daughter a hasty farewell in the hallway. Soon the door slammed behind her. Nick involuntarily ate comfortably, as if he had been blown away by an icy wind. He realized that the family hearth, in which he and his wife had kept the fire burning for more than 2 decades, began to cool rapidly. It was still possible to stop this process, but he did not want to. They arrived at the train station only a few minutes before the train left. Kate was afraid of being late. From this, even more fussed. As a pity, a decent queue formed near the ticket office, which led the girl into confusion. "Dad, if I'm late, I'll be in huge trouble. I should have left yesterday, but you and Mom are in a mess. So I decided to stay a day." Nick reassured his daughter not to come in. Kate snarled, "Yeah, I don't really care how crazy you guys get around here. It's just that I have to leave early tomorrow morning. I was going to ask you to drive me to the train station. That's different. You can ask Daddy for things, but you can't tell him what to do." "All right, kitten. If you'll take me early tomorrow, my daughter kicked me out to her room." And Nick began to get comfortable on the couch. Before falling into sleep, he remembered the previous evening and Kathy. Engrossed in pleasant thoughts, he did not notice how he burst out, "I'd do anything for a girl like that." Realizing that he had made a mistake, the man even stopped breathing. But soon he realized that no one had heard his enthusiastic cry. Betty had gotten up early on purpose so that she could make provisions for Kate. The pharmacy opened at 8 o'clock, so she couldn't be late. Her husband was still asleep after his walk, so she walked silently past the couch. The most surprising thing was that she felt absolutely no emotion. It was the first time such a thing had happened to her, and a bad thought burned her consciousness. Had we grown so sick of each other in these 20 years that we didn't care about anything? That question hung in the kitchen space, because the unhappy housewives were interrupted by the arrival of her husband. Hi. Packing was in full swing. Nick was in good spirits and spoke as if it wasn't her ruined birthday, so as not to exacerbate the already heated atmosphere in the house. Betty indifferently replied, "As you can see, gathering provisions. I hope you'll give Ikatha some money. My paycheck isn't until the end of the week." "Okay, I'll just check how much cash I have." The man rushed to the bedroom, but remembered that he had spent the night in a hotel. This fact caused a new surge of irritation. He muttered angrily, "I feel like a dog, thrown out on the street by the owners. I heard from the kitchen. Did you say something you heard?" He returned to the kitchen and handed his wife some bills. Hopefully, that would be enough for a third-year student. Betty put the money away in her desk drawer and asked with a sneer why such a tone this morning, or was last night not a success? On the contrary, it was great. I didn't even want to go home. I don't know why I deserve to be treated this way, and I warn you that I don't like sleeping on the couch. The woman parried, I don't like to breathe your booze. Nick wanted to remind his wife that she lives in the apartment, which he inherited from his grandmother. Moreover, this real estate is not subject to division, because the grandmother still in her lifetime has formalized a gift. Spread on this topic, the man did not, because he did not want to add dry wood to the fire of a family scandal to at least somehow smooth out the awkward situation. He asked, "You will come with us, or without you the pharmacy cannot work." "I'm not going. I don't want us to have a fight at the train station." Betty didn't even look at him. She deftly packed and travel bag Katie's daughter's luggage, is ready and go have breakfast before the road. "And I should be going now." Betty walked past her husband, who continued to stand plastered in the middle of the kitchen. She bade her daughter a hasty farewell in the hallway. Soon the door slammed behind her. Nick involuntarily ate comfortably, as if he had been blown away by an icy wind. He realized that the family hearth, in which he and his wife had kept the fire burning for more than 2 decades, began to cool rapidly. It was still possible to stop this process, but he did not want to. They arrived at the train station only a few minutes before the train left. Kate was afraid of being late. From this, even more fussed. As a pity, a decent queue formed near the ticket office, which led the girl into confusion. "Dad, if I'm late, I'll be in huge trouble. I should have left yesterday. But you and Mom are in a mess. So I decided to stay a day." Nick reassured his daughter not to come in. "I'm getting along now." The man disappeared behind a door labeled duty, but a minute later he appeared with a ticket in his hands. It's good to have useful acquaintances. Got a seat in a compartment in the car Kate ran, or the boarding will be over soon. The attendants were crowding on the platform, and Nick did not immediately notice Kathy, with whom he had spent a wonderful evening last night, but the girl did not see him. She stood a little farther away from the boarding place and smiled sweetly at someone who was already in the car. At that moment, the train jerked. Kate literally jumped into the carriage. "Daddy, throw the bag." To fulfill his daughter's request, he had to run a bit. Kate waved at him for a long time and sent air kisses. The man tried to seem cheerful, but he was uneasy and looked sadly at the fleeing train for a long time. Nick must have been in a state of prostration for several minutes, but he was called by a familiar female voice. "Nick, you're all right." Kathy looked at him and smiled. The closeness of this girl, especially her languid gaze, made the man's heart beat more often. "Thank you, I'm fine. Just a little sad. I was seeing my daughter off. She's studying in the capital." "Were you seeing someone off too?" Is the girl embarrassed? "Yes, I just happened to be here by chance. I was supposed to meet someone here, but he called and canceled. So I got nothing, I guess you could say." Coming home, a blush on my cheeks and running eyes. Nick realized that the girl wasn't telling the truth. He didn't bother to question her, who she was saying goodbye to so sweetly at the carriage window. He volunteered to give her a ride, and the girl gladly accepted his offer. At these moments, another unexpected encounter took place. Barely had Kate entered the wagon, the first person she saw was Max. The surprise was so strong that the girl let go of her heavy yet Lhasa bag's something loud read, but she did not even pay attention to this suspicious sound. "Max, how did you get here? You weren't supposed to go home." The young man was stunned by the encounter and blurted out the first thing that came to mind. "My folks had a little fight. I had to snap out of it." After a second, the guy came to his senses and asked Kate, "Are you trying to interrogate me?" "No, I was just asking. I didn't expect to see you here. Why are you so excited? Or is there a reason to hide the confusion?" The guy picked up the girl's bag, but this action turned out to be unpleasant for him. A dark, sticky mass splattered through the dense materials onto his pants. The guy screamed at the whole carriage. "Shit, what the hell is this stuff?" The girl laughed. "Max, don't be scared. It's not what you think it is. It's just jam. Mammy put jars in my bag, and apparently it broke. I've got to get that bag sorted out right away. By the way, you and I have a month's worth of provisions in there. Kate, did you at least tell me the can broke? I knew you grabbed the damn bag and went bankrupt. There's no disaster. We're gonna fix it. Give me your pants. We gotta do it while the stain's still fresh. Max glared angrily. I can take care of my own pants. Why are you trying to do everything for me? Please don't impose your services on me. And a female conductor appeared in the service compartment. Citizens, passengers, take your seats according to the tickets you bought. Max patted Ketu on the shoulder. Girl, go to your compartment and your bag. Don't forget, without waiting for her reaction, the guy walked to the other end of the carriage. Katya had no other choice but to go to her compartment. Behind the bag stretched a fragrant trail, which was immediately noticed by the conductor. What is this? Who pooped here? The girl began to apologize. I'm sorry, what happened? It's jam. I'll clean it up. The conductor was not satisfied with this promise, and she continued her accusatory speech about everything in the car turned into a stable. At home, no one would allow such an outrage. But on public transportation, you can do whatever you want. Kate was still standing in the compartment doorway. Don't yell, please. I told you I'll clean it up. The aunt in the uniform teased. Of course you will. Otherwise, I'll call you at the first station. Give me your ticket before you cheer for your ticket purse. Kate looked over to where Max had just disappeared. He reappeared in the corridor of the carriage and watched with interest as the conductor reprimanded her. Soon, an unfamiliar guy came out of the same compartment, and the two of them and Max went into the vestibule. The conductor went on, and Kate began to clean up the consequences of her carelessness. The whole way, Kate tried to figure out why Max was being so rude to her. Had he really apologized for the ruined pants? Or was there another reason? As she pondered, she suddenly realized that the young man was offended by her sudden disappearance. She was afraid of missing the train and hadn't even left him a note. True, the next day she called him and told him that she was visiting her parents. They had a very nice talk, and he even promised to meet her in the capital, but for reasons unknown to her was in her hometown. Max's explanation immediately seemed cheesy to the girl because she did not notice the guy's parents at the train station. One cheerful house began to dizzy, and suddenly a bright thought struck the girl. Probably Max thought I had someone and secretly followed me. She felt sorry for the guy she had dreamed of as her husband. They dated for a year, and at the beginning of this school semester Max proposed to Kate. Let's live together. This proposal did not embarrass the girl, because many student couples started their lives together before going to the registry office. There were many advantages to living together without marriage, and the main one was the opportunity to get to know each other better. Kate trusted Max completely and gladly accepted his proposal. They rented a relatively inexpensive room in a dormitory district and immediately moved to a new place. Of course, Kate didn't tell her parents about the changes in her life. She was afraid that they would not understand her and spoil everything. The girl was sure that the day would come and Max would make her an official proposal. But so far no such intentions were visible from his side. Having made a detailed analysis of the last months of her personal life, Kate decided to make the first step towards reconciliation. She resolutely went to the opposite end of the car and knocked on the compartment where Max had settled down. You can hear from the compartment. Come in. It's open. Kate expected one of the guys to open the door. But there was no movement in the compartment, so she had to do it herself. Max was lying on the bottom shelf with a book in his hands. He nodded at her and grumbled grudgingly, "You've got something urgent." His companion realized he was an extra and hopped out the door. "I'm going out for a smoke. You're a girl, come on in." She went into the compartment and sat down on the edge of the shelf where Max was lying. The young man gave her a displeased look. "Kate, tell me, why this demonstration? Couldn't you have waited until you arrived at your destination? To be honest, I'm getting tired of all this." All the words prepared beforehand instantly flew out of the girl's head. She did not notice how tears flowed from her eyes. "Max, I haven't had time to say a word and you're already tired. I came because I want to apologize." "For what?" "For leaving without warning. That's why you're mad at me. The young man put the book aside and sat down with his hands on his knees. Kate, we're not in kindergarten. It's just that we've coexisted in the same space for a while, and it's been nice for both of us. But our cohabitation was originally meant to be a non-committal relationship. Therefore, no reciprocal claims. The girl was doused with heat, and she wanted to teleport from this compartment to anywhere, even to the wild jungle or Antarctica. Words of resentment stuck in her throat. She wanted to get up, but her whole body shook with a fine tremor. Max saw the state she was in. He didn't calm her down, but added more fire. Kate, I don't know what you've got in your pretty criminal mind, but my immediate plans don't include marriage. I'm not ready for that yet. Oh, and I want to give you a heads up that I'm moving out of my apartment. Things I'll pick up later well. The girl did not answer anything. Jumped out of the compartment from the station. She went straight to the hostel from which she had moved out only a couple months ago. She barely broke the commandant to allow her to reoccupy it. Did it take Andrew long to give up? I can't. Not without orders. Kate began to bribe the older man to rehouse you. Andrew, you're kind. I don't just have nowhere to go. I can't spend the night at the station for appearance's sake. The commandant grumbled some more. No discipline. They do what they want. All right, I talked her into moving into 115. There's a freshman living there. Andrew helped the girl drag her bag into the room, and she gave him apples in gratitude. What? Resolve the rent issue. Kate called the landlady, but she demanded money for the current month. She had to give almost everything her parents had given her. The only thing left to do was to get her things. Kate decided not to postpone that too. She remembered Max's request and whispered to herself to guard her cold ones. She packed only her belongings that fit in one bag. Max was used to living comfortably, so he had a lot more belongings. Kate mentally imagined how he would move it all out of someone else's living quarters. She did not warn Max that she had left the rented accommodation. It wasn't until 2 days later that the young man made himself known. He called her cell phone between lectures and immediately started yelling, I asked for you as a human being. Was it so hard to get my stuff? Kate calmly answered him. I'm not your maid. And don't call again. I'm so bored with the squabbling. An affair that was supposed to end in marriage was over. Kate felt the separation from Max painfully. Especially she was hurt to realize that he did not take their relationship seriously. She did not tell anyone about the collapse of her first love, reassuring herself with nothing. Everything will soon settle down. But I gained useful experience. It's good that I haven't called all over the village. I'm getting married. But I won't fall into that trap again. Everywhere hovered the New Year mood and smelled strongly of sickness to keep up with other organizations in the city. The pharmacy staff decided to get busy in the morning preparing for the upcoming holiday. Aunt Miranda voluntarily took charge of this process. And the role of the main performer went to Jenna, as she was the youngest in the team. Betty had never seen the pharmacy so lively before. No sooner had she entered the sales room than she was immediately involved in the process. Miranda stood in the center of the room in an exquisite voice and gave out commands. First, we will decorate the inside of the hall, and then we will hang the glowing stars on the windows. Betty, get dressed and get to work. You're in charge of decorations, Christmas trees, and Jenna's going to be the top of the line. We're going to let her put up the rain. It was amusing to watch the cleaning lady in charge from the sidelines. Aunt Miranda's confident voice and the surrounding entourage filled Betty's heart with excitement and anticipation. She quickly changed her clothes and got down to her assigned task. The cleaning lady was pleased with the progress of the preparations. Okay, gals, while you're running the place, have at it. I'll go look for the men. Jenna stood on a stepladder and by a string extracted from the package of multicolored glitter. Aunt Miranda, what do you need men for? You can hang them somewhere too. The old woman shook her head vigorously. Oh, young people, all you want is to be searched. Tell me, how did you hang this glowing thing on the windows without men's help? The old woman nodded toward the brightly colored boxes with inscriptions in a foreign language. Jenna giggled again. Aunt Miranda, it's not a thing. It's an illumination element. They sell a lot of that Chinese stuff nowadays. You can pick out anything you want. Miranda remarked snidely, and that was that. You know, the girl snapped back. Not all of you to shine with knowledge. The superintendent appeared from her office. What's all the commotion? Miranda immediately changed her commanding tone to ingratiating. Oh, Christina. You can't imagine how hard it is to argue with young people. When I worked in the prosecutor's office, we had gas in our apartment. Here we go again. Jenna ruthlessly interrupted Aunt Dusha. Let's talk about something else. Lutogo threatened the girl with a finger. Jenna. Elders should be respected. The girl immediately replied, Christina. I don't mind. But you cannot impose your opinion on everyone and endlessly talk about working in the prosecutor's office. You get the impression that Aunt Miranda was in charge of everything there. I can see her sitting on the bench and looking out at the crowd. The superintendent laughed. Jenna, you have a vivid imagination. But it seems to me that our Miranda has nothing in common with the concept of pilot. I've been haunted by that analogy since my first day here. Aunt Miranda is an exact replica. It's a known historical figure. It's especially clear when she leans on her mop. The women laughed amicably, and at the same time, Aunt Miranda returned from her assignment. All my bones have been washed. These did not tire. Lutago lightly put her arm around the cleaning lady's shoulders. Miranda, I don't know what we do without you. Don't take offense to the girls. They mean it from the bottom of their hearts. No offense taken, Christina. It's not like it's my fault. If the girls laugh a little, when the mood is good, and the work argues with the presence of the headmistress, spurred the enterprising cleaner, and she pounced on the youngest. Jenna, what are you talking about? Step it up. Move it. You're not even halfway done. Look at Betty Alexandrovna. She has a Christmas tree dressed up, and Ded Moros and Snegurovska are on full alert. We are now sculpting snowflakes for the windows with her. Jenna poked at the paper snowflakes again. Stupid primitive. Aunt Miranda countered. Don't spit on a classic of the genre. Snowflakes are a staple of the holiday season. I remember in kindergarten I cut such decorations from napkins. Jenna came in from laughter and almost fell off the stepladder. Oh, I can't. Aunt Miranda and kindergarten. I want to introduce you to the little one, but I can't. Laughter. The girls infected the others. The women laughed until they were exhausted, and none of them noticed a man in an expensive sheepskin coat enter the drugstore. He thundered and flip-flopped. Then he asked, pardon me, I'm looking for Betty Starostina. The laughter stopped and the women looked at each other. Jenna took a step forward. Go ahead. Noticing the perplexed looks of her colleagues, she explained, Betty, my maiden name. The visitor didn't introduce herself, but asked if there was somewhere we could talk without witnesses. Betty was confused. If only here, in the pharmacy, in the hall, the presence of strangers in the office is not allowed. Then the only option is my car. Don't worry, I won't keep you long. All right, I'll just go to the superintendent's office. Betty threw a fur coat over her shoulders and followed the man. Aunt Miranda and Jeannie stuck to the window and shared their curiosity. And the cleaning lady immediately began to put forward her versions of what was happening. The man looks like a lawyer. Maybe our provisor at Christmas got some money. Jenna said ironically, it's just like a fairy tale, you know, a windfall. Did you ever think, Miranda, that it could be more prosaic than that? Like an accident or an unpaid loan from the bank. Or maybe Betty decided to divorce her husband, and his lawyer showed up to negotiate the terms. Aunt Miranda yelled at Jenna not to talk nonsense. I hear they have a model family, and the daughter is in law school herself. And you know all that, Miranda. You should be a reporter. I cleaned the newsroom for a while too, only it was a long time ago and not for long. While the pharmacy employees were wondering why the lawyer-looking man Betty Jenna had a real shock in just a few minutes. As soon as she got into the car, the stranger briefly introduced himself as Anthony. I am your father's lawyer. The woman was instantly hit with a wave of the most unpleasant memories. She abruptly opened the car door. I'm sorry, but you and I have nothing to talk about. And please tell my father not to send any more messengers to me. I cut that man out of my life a long time ago, and I don't want to hear from him. She was ready to jump out of the car, but Anthony handed her an envelope. Betty, please don't be so quick to cut the last thread. Read this letter. Sebastian asked me to give it to you. Read it, and then decide for yourself what is the right thing to do. With hands shaking with excitement, the woman took the envelope and got out of the car. The lawyer called Betty to her. "Take my card. If you decide to call, I'm available at all hours of the day and night." The woman opened the envelope right on the street and read the short message, "Daughter, I am deeply guilty before you, and I know I deserve no pity. I have no hope of forgiveness, but still I have decided to make a request to you. I want to see you. It is time for me to atone for my sins, and this may be my last request. I hope you won't refuse me." Light snowflakes fell on the white sheet of paper and immediately melted, leaving wet traces. Betty reread the message from the past several times and didn't feel the unshed tears rolling down her cheeks. Those tears were Echo's old resentments. She remembered her father leaving home for good on a winter day like this. Betty, then 15 years old. On New Year's Eve, their school traditionally held a winter ball to choose a snow princess. Betty was the main contender for this title, so the whole family was preparing for the event. About a week before the holiday, her father took her to town. They were living in a small village in another part of the country at the time and said, "Daughter mine, I want you to be the star of the ball, but this wish will be fulfilled if we buy you the most luxurious dresses." Half a day they went shopping and were already exhausted. When they went down to the basement where designer clothes were sold, Betty immediately saw a dress that could be called a work of art. She couldn't take her eyes off the gorgeous piece, but when the salesman named the price, she felt sick to her stomach. Betty grabbed her father's hand and dragged him towards the exit. "Daddy, come on, we can't afford this dress. We'll find something simpler." They went outside. For a few minutes my father thought hard and then waved his hand. "I've been there. We only live once, daughter. I want you to remember your New Year's Eve ball for the rest of your life." Her father's words proved prophetic. Betty remembered that day forever. But she wasn't destined to be the star of the ball. Her parents promised their daughter support, including a personal presence at the event. The ball was to be held in the evening, and the women began preparing in the morning. They were in full parade when the head of the family, Sebastian, came home and looked at his daughter and wife in bewilderment. "Where are you dressed up like that?" Betty was surprised. "Daddy, you forgot today I have a ball at school and you and Mom promised." The man waved his hand tiredly. "Yes, I did, but I'm not going to make it. Betty, please come out for a moment. Mom and I need to talk about something." She left her parents alone, unaware that their family's fate was being decided behind the glass door. The conversation was short-lived, and soon her father opened the door and strode into the bedroom without paying attention to her. Betty rushed to her mother. "Mom, what's going on? Why doesn't Dad look like himself?" Mother didn't even move, and her glassy gaze was directed to an unknown point under the ceiling. The girl started shaking her. "Mom, wake up. What did Daddy say to you? You don't have a daddy anymore. He's leaving us." The mother's lips barely moved. Betty hardly realized what she was saying when the meaning of what she was saying came to her. She rushed into the hallway, where her father was already standing with a suitcase in his hand. Betty pounced on him and began beating her fists fiercely against his chest. "Daddy, why did you do that? Daughter, why did I spoil your mood? But I can't lie anymore. Will you ever understand me?" Maybe Sebastian wanted to kiss his daughter goodbye, but Betty threw it in his face. "Never, you hear me, never will I forgive you for betraying me." The father didn't say another word. He picked up his suitcase and left the apartment, carefully shut the door behind him. Betty cried all evening. Most of all, she was hurt that her father had chosen to leave on such an important day for her. In desperation, she cut the dress in which she was to shine at the ball into small pieces. Betty, often thinking back to that day, thought that this is how dreams are shattered. Shortly after New Year's Eve, she and her mother sold their apartment and left the village. Their mother's aunt sheltered them for a while, but the relative had a lively temper, and they had to look for another place of residence. Thanks to Mom's profession, she was a doctor. They settled quite well in a small provincial town. There Betty finished school and entered the pharmacy faculty of the medical university. Her mother pulled her alone because she didn't want to accept help from her father, an aunt with a harmful temper. They found out he was looking for them. But her mother firmly said, "I will never forgive him." Betty decided to cut her father out of her life completely. After her mother's untimely death, she believed it was his fault her mother had left so early. She was only 45 years old. Betty was going through the worst loss of her life. But during this difficult period, she had a devoted friend and her beloved husband by her side. She married Nick Jenna when she was in university. But so far, she has never regretted it. Betty considered her spouse a paragon of male decency until recently. That was why everything that had been going on between them in recent months had bothered her greatly. Nick was experiencing the coming of a second youth. He had no idea that there was such passion in the world, which he was lucky enough to experience every time he met Kathy. His master's daughter had literally captivated him. But this captivity was like a sweet dream. All the man's thoughts were now occupied only with Kathy. He longed for her kisses. The man's imagination painted such pictures, such forthcoming encounters, that he had been ashamed of before. But for Kathy, there were no forbidden topics or activities. When he had first been struck by her boldness, the girl had said with a chuckle, "Nick, this is just the flowers. You'll be obedient. I'll let you taste the berries." The man never thought that at such a respectable age he would be obedient like a boy. But it did not stress him, on the contrary, energized him. Acquaintance with Kathy completely overturned his idea of the relationship between a woman and a man. Betty had always been reserved. She was shy to show openly her feelings. Of course, Nick had women, but none of the secret lovers could compare with Kathy. After only a few meetings, he told Kathy, "If you knew how much I hate to break up with you." "So what's the matter?" The man sighed. "You know I'm not free," Nick stated with his arms and his neck. "It's up to you. Fulfills a marriage obligation for the rest of your life. It's very boring and stupid. And then, as far as I know, your daughter is already quite capable of taking care of herself, and you've given your wife over 20 years of happiness, which is a long time." The man felt the closeness of the woman he loved, listening to her cooing voice. He fully agreed with Kathy that Betty should thank him for living with her for so many years, but he deserves a little bit of happiness too. And that's only possible with Kathy by his side. During a meeting just before New Year's Eve, Kathy had a mysterious look on her face. "Nick, I didn't want to tell you, but I'm getting impatient." He was shying away from the girl in his arms. "Confessing and rogue girls, what have you kept from me?" Kathy accepted the game and soon in a funny face said, "From you, it is impossible to hide anything, my lord. So I will tell you a terrible secret. You will soon be the director of the new factory." Although Martin himself had spoken several times about his desire to be promoted to the position of chief engineer, Nick considered his words to be empty talk. So Kathy's confession didn't surprise him much. Where did this information come from? The girl disappointedly pouted her lips. "I thought you were excited, and I'm excited honestly. But I'm sorry to be blunt, but your father's words are often at odds with deeds. He hinted in the fall that if I did well, he'd make me director of the new factory. I was even encouraged by that promise. But then I was told by a knowledgeable person that there was another candidate for the vacancy. Some young fellow, a graduate of the institute." The man noticed Kathy blushing. At these words, she began to wave her hands nervously. "Who do you believe, me or a dubious source? There is no graduate, and you would be the prime candidate for the position. If you want, I'll talk to my father." He pulled the girl to him. "I do, but most of all, I want you to always be by my side." Kathy made sly eyes. "That's a proposition. Yes, and I'll try to be free soon." The girl was getting excited. "Nick, I love you. I'm crazy about you too. You know, I've been thinking a long time, and I realized you're right. Why torture yourself? Why make yourself pretend to be a happy man? You can't tell your heart to love someone. It chooses." Nick has made a big decision. He realized that he was going to have an unpleasant conversation with his wife, but the desire to start a new life with Kathy gave him confidence in his heart. After a few days' thought, he decided to tell Betty. It was better to cut things off in one fell swoop than to pull the gum with the firm intention of putting a stop to his relationship with his wife. The man opened the apartment door and froze on the threshold because there were 2 fluff bins standing in the hallway. Nick blurted out. "What does that mean?" "Betty, we have someone coming to visit us." Betty appeared in the hallway, followed by Kate. "Hi, Daddy. I'm sorry, I haven't had time to talk to you. Mom and I are going away, but we'll be back in 2 or 3 days." The girl hurriedly poked her father's cheek. "By the way, can you give me and my mom a ride to the train station? You don't want to run after the train like that time." Betty had been silent the whole time, and Nick looked at her. "Maybe you could tell me where you're going." The woman answered reluctantly. "My relative invited us to visit. After the holidays, we will come right away. And you asked me." "Why do you ask? It's not like you're advising everything with me. You do what you think is right. I'm just following your lead." Betty took hold of the suitcase. "Are you taking us?" "Sure, I haven't had a chance to put the car in the garage yet." Nick took both bags and headed for the elevator. Kate was counting without closing her mouth in anticipation of the vivid impressions of the trip. "Dad, don't you realize how surreal this is? I get there, and Mom says to her daughter, 'Get ready. We're going to Grandpa's.' You know, I didn't know I had a grandfather." "Well, I did, because everyone has grandparents. But I thought my ancestor had been there for a long time." Kate raised her eyes upward and then looked at her father. "Really? That's great, Dad." The man muttered, "Probably great. Betty, why didn't you talk about your father before?" The woman again answered the question with a question to the question, "Why, Nick? Are you interested in what I do for a living and what Kate has? You become very distant from us in the last few months." He suggested, "Let's not spoil each other's mood right now. We'll talk after the holidays." Boarding had already been announced, and they had to run to their car. Kate grumbled loudly, running again. "Normal people arrive in advance, and we jump on the train at the last minute or at all. They wouldn't let us on the plane for sure." The train was moving fast. Kate asked sadly, "Mom, do you feel sorry for him?" "For who?" "I see Daddy who." Betty sat down tiredly by the window. "I don't know, Kate, and pity is not a good feeling. It's like weakness, and weak-willed people don't inspire respect." The girl sighed heavily. "Are you right? A weak person is very vulnerable." The mother laughed. "Daughter, you speak as if you have already experienced all earthly passions." Without taking her eyes off the window, Kate straight killed. "Not all, but many. For example, I recently learned what betrayal is." The girl spoke of it with pain, and Betty felt a prickling, invisible needles under her heart. She asked with involvement, "Max didn't live up to your expectations." The girl perked up. All these months, she had carried my pain unbearably within her, afraid to confide in even her closest friend. Her mother's sincere involvement prompted a desire to shed the weight. She cried as she told the closest person she had ever known about her sad experience. "I always considered him decent, almost the standard of a real man. I was courted by many guys, but I chose Max. We dated for a whole year and then decided to live together. I thought we'd get married, and Max hinted at it many times. But then things changed. He became rude and even aggressive. But I was stupid, naive. I didn't realize anything. I thought it was me. It was only later that I found out that Max was seeing someone else. You know, Mom, he left me for a gorgeous aunt who's 7 years older than him." "Max told you about this?" "No. First, a girl said she was in the same department with Max. And then Max confessed that he was falling in love with the daughter of a businessman. Like her dad promised him a job after college. In short, your Max traded you for a comfortable life. Then don't feel sorry for him. People like that will let you down sooner or later." Kate tried to smile at her mom. "I'm trying to forget him, but it's not working. You can't help what your heart tells you to do." "That's true, daughter. But don't despair. You have your whole life ahead of you, and you'll meet a worthy man. And the first experience, even a bad one, is useful in any case." Wheels, drains, and kilometers of track. And the two women sat at the carriage window, looking out into the snowy distance. It was as if they were trying to see a light of hope in the brain and darkness. All the way, Betty tried to mentally visualize the meeting with her father after so many years of separation. But the exertion gave her a headache and jumbled her thoughts even more. Then she decided to turn her mind to something else. "I'd rather think of something pleasant." However, there was a problem with this direction too. Because of all the pleasant events that had happened in recent months, only work could be singled out. She remembered how they had decorated the drugstore with tinsel and garlands, and her heart immediately warmed. How much does it mean for a person and his environment favorable environment? I want to live and work. Probably that's why the pharmacy has become my second home. But the first one has recently become very uncomfortable. And how to correct the situation? I don't know yet. The woman herself did not notice how she fell asleep, woke her up by the loud cry of her daughter, "Mom, wake up. We're almost there." Betty felt as if she had been electrocuted. She jumped up and started frantically packing her things with precision. Kate laughed. "Mom, what did you pick up?" The woman grudgingly muttered, "You were yelling at the whole carriage that we'd arrived, weren't you?" "I was talking almost. We're here. Can you tell the difference?" Betty waved her daughter away with irritation. "Kate, you need to learn to talk normally. Honestly, I'm sick of this stuff." Betty mimed something incomprehensible with her fingers and turned away to the window. The girl sat down next to her. "Mommy, not Miranda. Sorry, rascals." The woman sighed heavily, and the daughter took it as a sign that her mother was no longer angry with her ingratiating voice. She asked Mom, wondering if anyone would meet us, or would we wander around looking for Grandpa Dom at home? "He probably lives in Canada, doesn't he?" Betty broke away from contemplating the winter scenery that flashed outside the window. "I don't know, daughter. I haven't seen my father since he left us, so I can't describe his home to you. But judging by the lawyer acting on Dad's behalf, he doesn't live too badly." To Betty's surprise, the familiar Anthony met them at the train station. However, this time the lawyer was wearing a coat, at the sight of which Kate quietly whispered to die and not get up. It was to Siani Betty to pull Kate's daughter back. "You're acting like a bizarre aunt to us. Shut up. I'll behave myself. Just tell me who this guy is. By the way, he's almost a colleague of yours, your father's lawyer." At least that's how he introduced himself. Kate forgot her promise. "I don't think Grandpa is in a bar." Anthony turned around and looked at the girl with interest, but his speech sounded boring and monotonous. "Sebastian is quite a famous man in the business world, but lately he prefers to live in his country residence, where we are going at the moment." Suddenly, the man smiled and immediately became 10 years younger. This instantaneous transformation struck Betty Alexandrovna, and she thought how dramatically a person's appearance could change. Just one smile. When they got into the car, Anthony hesitantly said, "I should have warned you right away, but I did not think that you would so quickly decide to check on Sebastian. The thing is, he's seriously ill, so try to be gentle with him." "How much is that possible?" Betty asked him, so he decided to seek me out. "Not exactly. This is my 3rd year working for Sebastian, but I know he has made attempts to find you before. But as far as I know, my predecessor didn't try very hard. So it's to your credit then." The lawyer smiled again. "I really wanted to do something good for Sebastian. He's a wonderful man. People like him are rare. When I had problems in my family, he helped me a lot." Betty was again very surprised. "That's right. They say everything in this world is relative." Anthony understood her. "That's right. The same person acts differently depending on the circumstances. That is, in some cases he does good, and in others he hurts someone. A woman whispered a long time ago, 'My daddy hurt me and my mommy too.'" The lawyer heard what she said but remained silent. Kate, too, remained silent the whole way. But when the car stopped at the estate gate, she didn't hold back. "Wow, this is where my grandfather lives. That's quite a house." The way to the house was through a small park. Kate did not hide her admiration for the original design of this area. "Isn't it beautiful? I've only seen such beauty in glossy magazines." Sebastian greeted the guests at the front door. He hadn't changed much in a quarter of a century. Only his luxurious hair had changed a little, and she sat up when she saw him. Betty felt an intense excitement. A variety of feelings mixed in her soul, and she didn't know how she should proceed. Sebastian was the first to make a move toward reconciliation. Leaning on his cane, he came closer to her, but did not dare to embrace her. He looked at his daughter for a minute, and then he cried, "Thank you, daughter, for coming. I didn't expect to see you. I know I don't deserve your forgiveness, But even you showing up here is a miracle." Betty looked at her father, but she couldn't move. This meeting was very different from what she had envisioned. She thought she'd say everything to the man who'd traded her and her mother for another woman, but those sincere male tears made her shudder. All the words slipped out of her head at once. Kate stood a little farther away. Noticing her mother's confusion, she rushed to Sebastian. "Grandfather, please don't cry. You have no idea how glad I am that I have a real grandfather now." Sarostin hugged the girl, and his shoulders often trembled. To see a grown man crying was unbearable. By an effort of will, Betty threw off her stupor and immediately felt all the resentments recede away. In a hoarse voice, she mumbled, "Daddy, I've already forgiven you. Just don't cry, please." 2 days of New Year holidays flew by like 1 hour. They spent a magical night in a close family circle. Kate never left her grandfather's side. She was the boss at the table, asking everyone to participate in the games she invented. Betty watched her daughter all these days, never ceasing to be amazed at how she quickly found a common language with her grandfather. Her mother could see that Kate didn't want to leave this place. She thought she would like to stay here for a week or more. During these days, she had thought of her husband only once. True, this message of memory did not upset the woman. He didn't even congratulate me and Kate. Okay, he has a grudge against me. But what did the daughter do? The woman picked up her cell phone several times, but never called her husband. On the eve of the planned departure, Sebastian invited her daughter and granddaughter to his office. Kate immediately put forward her version. Mom gut feel that the grandfather will now start talking about the inheritance. To be honest, I don't want to be there. So what do you suggest? I don't know yet, but I'm sure I'll think of something. This doesn't feel right. I mean, I just got my grandfather and we're leaving again. And his illness. Isn't there a cure? I don't know. Daughter, Mom, you work at the pharmacy. Do you have access to all the medications? Unfortunately, Kate, there are times when the strongest medications don't work. The girl shook her curls, mistakes hair. I should have studied to be a pharmacist. I would definitely have come up with a universal cure for all diseases. Unexpectedly, Sebastian intervened in their conversation. Mother and daughter didn't notice him approach. Granddaughter, there is already such a cure. It's called love. Are you here? I felt better immediately. Believe it or not. Well, that's all philosophical. We've got earthly things to think about. I have a serious conversation with you, or rather a proposal. The man went to his desk and sat down in the chair with difficulty. I will not talk about my granddaughter at the investigation, because I have long ago disposed of my property. I wanted to say something else. You see, I'm very lonely, and my health is failing. I understand that I have no right to ask you. I'd like to live with my family for the last time, even if it's a month or a year, but to live among my relatives. Can you consider this wish as my last request? The man laughed, but it was a strained laugh, and Betty was again pierced by lightning pain. The woman instinctively put her hand to the area of her heart and quietly mumbled this so unexpectedly. We need to think about how best to proceed. Kate adored her mother with a burning gaze. Mom, what is there to think about if you can't give up your pharmacy yet? I can live with Grandpa for a while. I can even take an academic in case of emergency. No, granddaughter, I don't need that kind of sacrifice, but I would appreciate it if you could brighten my loneliness for a short while. This option satisfied everyone, and they sat in Betty's office for a long time. Sebastian told about how almost immediately after leaving his family, he realized that he had made the worst mistake. It wasn't love, it was an obsession. It was like I was blinded. And when I came to my senses, it was too late. I looked for you, but your mom's aunt didn't know where you'd gone. Then I met a buddy from the army and went into business full time. We started out as a security service. And as the business got going, so did we. The money expanded. Basically, that's how life flew by. Only when I was diagnosed with this damn disease, I decided to resume the search. Thanks to new technology, and Anthony is the one who found you. You have no idea how glad I am that you're here. I just wanted to do something nice for you. Kate took the bait immediately. Grandpa, can you grant me one wish? An income of 10? No, just one. But I'll tell you in confidence later, okay? Let it be a surprise for Mom. Betty realizes she's redundant, and she's being polite. You're right, her own daughter came alive from the study. She quietly shut the door behind her and smiled at her thoughts. How nice it is to feel needed. Kate is burning with impatience. I want to please my grandfather. Why didn't I ever think of finding my father before? She knew the answer to that question well, but she didn't want to admit to herself that the resentment had been weighing on her soul. All these years. The next day, Betty set off on her return journey. Kate decided to stay at her grandfather's house. Mom's going on vacation soon anyway. I've passed my credits, so I can stay at Grandpa's for a couple weeks. Especially we need to do something urgent with him. My mother was surprised. Wow, you two already have something in common. Good for you. Her daughter walked her to the train station with her lawyer. From the way Anthony looked at Kate, Betty realized that they were not only professionally interested in each other, but that she liked her father's lawyer, and she didn't mind him courting Kate. The trip to see her father completely changed Betty's outlook. She did not think that in just a few days her life orientations could change so radically. Before, everything revolved around her husband, who demanded special treatment. Now there was a man who needed her love and care. The most surprising thing was that this burden was not a burden to her, and even brought her joy. The apartment was quiet and cold. Unpleasant goosebumps ran down her back. Betty said sadly, "Well, our family hearth has gone out." It's as if the place were haunted, but not inhabited by living people. Why is it so cold? Maybe the heat's been turned off. She touched the radiator and immediately jerked her hand away. No, it's fine. I may have caught a cold on the road, and I'll get a bit of a pick-me-up. The woman looked around the rooms. Noted with surprise that everything was just as it had been the day they left. Even the chair that her daughter had used as a prop when she packed her bag was in the same place. Had Nick not been here all these days? Maybe something had happened to him. She pulled her cell phone out of her bag and had already dialed her husband's number. But remembering how coldly they had said goodbye, she dropped the call. Before the beginning of New Year's Eve, I got them cheerful. The girls from the pharmacy congratulated me. Even the superintendent sent an SMS. Husband forgot about us. The woman sank down on the sofa in the living room and tiredly closed her eyes. How I envy Kate. She's with her grandfather and that lawyer. I'm all alone. And apparently, I have a cold. While the woman lamented the poor start to the new year, Nick felt the book and bliss in her arms. The young woman whispered softly in his ear, "Kitty. But when you and I are together, I'm already tired of hiding, and you yourself understand perfectly well that in a small town like ours, it is impossible to hide our relationship for a long time. Just bear with me a little longer. You can see that I'm making steps towards our happiness." We spent the New Year holidays together. The girl interrupted him impatiently. And if your old lady hadn't moved out, it's unlikely that you and I would have spent that time together. From behind, be condescending. And don't call my wife an old lady. It's not an insult, it's a statement of fact. I went to the pharmacy where your Betty works, and I'll tell you she looks about 50. Do you feel sorry for her? No. I feel sorry for myself because I've wasted 20 years of my life. To be honest, I stopped going out in public with my wife a long time ago. You're right about her not looking so good. What's that? Not good. She really looks like an old lady with so many wrinkles and skin like parchment. Please spare me the details. I don't like talking about it, and I don't like hiding. Do you have any idea what would happen if my father found out about our affair? Nick jumped up and down like an electric shock. He didn't like Kathy's insinuation because it didn't fit with his plans for the future. Kathy, you're not a girl who's been charmed by a grown-up uncle. You can spot anyone yourself in 2 minutes. The man began to measure the small room, which had become a favorite place for their secret rendezvous. And then I asked you from the beginning, don't bother me. I'll talk to my wife. When the time is right. Kathy pricked the lever behind the stair. While you're waiting for that moment, my daddy will find another candidate. You think you're the only one applying for the principal's job? Nah, there's more in this line of young and enterprising. He grabbed her roughly by the shoulders. Are you sleeping with these young and enterprising too? The girl was not on a joke frightened Nick. "What do you think you're doing? I do not like such scenes of jealousy. And remember, I'm not used to answer to anyone, and I will not let you tear down in my presence." Kathy said all that in one breath. She dropped his hands from her shoulders and only then bestowed Nick with an icy stare. The man physically felt the coldness emanating from her. He grimaced, looked at his favorite four. "Well, I'm sorry, I snapped and overreacted. But you have to realize that it's all out of love. You're making me crazy. Honestly, I don't care about the director's chair anymore. I just want to be happy, and that's only possible with you." Kathy immediately turned from anger to grace. "The only way you'll be with me, Kitty, is if you change your marital status. And I suggest you hurry up. By the way, you should call. Maybe your old lady is back already?" Nick obeyed Kathy without much desire. He picked up his cell phone from the coffee table and dialed his wife's number. "Betty, it's me. Happy New Year. I'm sorry I couldn't get to you in time. I left my cell phone at home." "Yeah, I spent Christmas. Why are you sick?" "Okay, I'll be right there." All this time, Kathy stood opposite and watched him with a contemptuous smile. When Nick turned off his cell phone, she said with a sneer, "God, how touching is that? Honey, are you sick? Be patient, I'll be there soon. Don't forget your wife's ears and milk." Nick could see that Kathy would cry with resentment in a minute. So he put his arms around her. "Just 5 minutes ago, you had me all to yourself. Went home, and now you don't want to let me go." The girl exclaimed, "There's a big reason again, and you won't talk to her. I feel like this is going to go on forever. Here's to it, and calm down. I promise I'll sort it out this week. She's not going to be sick forever. Colds go away in 3 to 5 days. I'll call you tomorrow. I'll keep you posted." That promise calmed the girl down a little. Nick walked home, and his thoughts remained in that cozy room with one window, which had a stunning view of the city park. That evening, he didn't want to go back to his apartment like never before. "As soon as I imagined my wife, whose face always expressed the same feeling, nausea immediately came to my throat. This unpleasant sensation had appeared long ago and was increasing every day." Nick even sinfully thought that his wife had cast a spoil on him. But then he dismissed the thought. Betty would never stoop to such baseness. She is an educated woman and not jealous. But Kathy's point about her looks is very true. Though her figure would be the envy of any woman. The man mentally enumerated all the advantages of his wife and decided that the main positive qualities were her unique ability to get along with everyone. Indeed, Betty, for all the years of their life together, never once made a scene to him, although knew about his occasional affairs on the side. She silently forgave him for going to the left for the sake of keeping the family together. And all these years, Nick was satisfied with the restraint of his wife. But recently, this positive quality began to irritate him a lot. And only now he realized why it was happening. Betty cold as a fish, wicked hot. And that's exactly the kind of hot women men like. And I have nothing to be embarrassed about when I want to be with this incredible woman. I need to keep talking to her, especially since I sense Betty's got a clue. He opened the apartment door with determination. "Betty, your Dr. Abolite has arrived from the living room," came his wife's husky voice. "Nick, believe me, I'm not laughing. Apparently, I picked up some kind of infection on the trip, so you'd better stay away from me. Who's gonna fix you? Now I'm in for a live pair of garlic cloves, and no germs will take me." The man went to the kitchen, humming a popular song. "Christmas is coming. Soon everything's gonna happen. Betty, where did you lose our daughter?" The woman was singing about bread. "She stayed with her grandfather." "So the unknown relative is your father?" "I'm sorry, Nick, but it hurts to talk. My throat is burning. I'll tell you all about it later." The man brought warm tea, touched her forehead with his hand. "You sound like a mother. Tell me, what pills should I give you to bring down your fever?" "Bring the medicine cabinet. It's in the kitchen. I'll pick out what I need." By evening, Betty was feeling a little better, but she was not yet in a condition to talk to her about serious things. Nick was weighed down by everything: Betty's sudden illness, the uncertainty at work, and the strange coldness of the apartment. He paced nervously around the room and ran his hand over the radiators. Betty said with a chuckle, The heating system was fine. I checked. Where's the coal coming from? I don't understand. There was nothing more to talk about. Nick's desire to help his wife quickly burned out in his soul, and he hurried to seclude himself in the bedroom. Only on the fourth day Betty felt better. She decided to go down to the first floor to check the mailbox. Kate had called the night before to say that she had sent her a very important document by registered mail. Mom, Grandpa, and I decided to surprise you. I'm sure you'll be surprised, but it's up to you. How do you want to handle this? The woman had not yet fully recovered from her weakness. She was dizzy. Kate, what is this stupid way of talking to your mother in riddles? Not now, but I don't want a surprise in yours. I can barely stand on my feet. That's why I've decided to give you a little bit of information. When you get the letter, call me. I will. Kate, why don't you ask about Dad? Why wouldn't I? He didn't even congratulate us. Dad said he was visiting. He left his cell phone at home. And you believe him. Well, that's your own business. Yesterday, during this conversation, Betty didn't pay attention to the intonation in her daughter's voice. But today, as her head began to clear, she realized that her daughter knew something but wasn't telling her the whole story. She thought again with irritation, all the while puzzled. She shouldn't be writing fantasy novels. There was indeed a registered letter receipt notice in the mailbox. At first, the woman wanted to postpone her visit to the post office until tomorrow, but then she changed her mind. I wondered what she had sent there. Slowly, we crawled to the post office. It took her almost 2 hours to get to the post office. She was on her way home, barely able to move her legs. And damn it, I had to drag myself out here today. All I needed was to get a complication before I called the elevator. Betty, on a hunch, headed for the mailbox again and was surprised to find something white there. She muttered, I wonder who put a message in there. In the box was a thick, unstamped envelope with only her name printed on it. Something about the message made the woman suspicious, and she was in no hurry to open the envelope. First, I'll see what my daughter sent me by registered mail. There was a copy of the contract for a deal to buy a woodworking mill. Betty didn't immediately realize that the document was in her name. The name of the company seemed painfully familiar to her, and she exhaled in surprise. So this was the mill where Nick worked. But how had those two managed to concoct this deal so quickly? A surprise indeed. I can only imagine how pleased Nick will be. Betty put the document aside and went into the kitchen to make dinner. She remembered about the second envelope when the cooking process was in full swing. The woman began to hastily open it. The thin paper tore and the color pictures fell on the floor. There were only 5 of them, but Betty spent half an hour looking at them. The shock was so intense that the woman didn't realize she was sitting on the floor. She only came back to reality when the front door opened. Nick's cheerful voice shouted out, "How are you feeling?" Betty gathered the pictures from the floor and walked out with them to greet her husband. Feeling much worse than she did. The man raised his eyebrows in surprise. "Betty, what's with the tone? Did she put the pictures in his hands? How do you expect me to talk to you after that?" Nick cast only a glance at the top photo and covered himself in vapor. "Where did you get this? Do you know better?" The blood rushed to his temples, and he forgot about everything in the world. "So, I cheated on you, and I did it with great pleasure. Look at you, you're like the forbidden apple, trying to make yourself look like something worthwhile. You should be scrapped and not making a show of it. Don't forget, this is my apartment." She forced herself to hold back her tears and patiently listen to all of her husband's insults. When Nick reminded her that he was the owner of the apartment, she quietly said, "Okay, I will get out of here today." The man shouted in excitement, "Yes, please, I'm sick of your sour face. And I'm sick of that unbearable drugstore smell that permeates this apartment. I suggest you go to a monastery. That's where you belong. You'll be in some almshouse treating the poor and the weak." While her husband talked about her future, Betty packed the very same bag with which she had recently returned from a trip to her father's house. She was about to slam the door when she saw the envelope with the registered letter on the nightstand in the hallway. She laughed in her husband's face. "Nick, you're getting excited early. I'll leave today and you'll be out of a job tomorrow." His wife's laughter startled Nick, but he quickly mastered himself unhappy. "Are you threatening me?" What are you capable of? Yes, look, so to speak, familiarize yourself with the document. It's a copy, and my father has the original. So don't think there's no one to protect me. Nick had snatched the document from his wife's hands. As he studied this document, the expression on his face changed. But that can't be true. Kathy said that Betty was not interested in listening to what Kathy was telling her husband. She called Aunt Miranda, who lived nearby, and asked to spend the night at her place. Miranda gladly agreed. Betty, don't even hesitate. You can stay with me until you get bored. My old man won't say a word against it. He's my kind of guy. The woman decided to take advantage of this kind woman's hospitality. She told her family tragedies and asked her not to tell anyone at work that her husband had kicked her out. In the morning, Betty wrote a statement explaining her decision to urgently dismiss with her father's illness. Even at night, the station square was bustling with life. Nick had lived in the big city for more than 5 years, but he could not get used to its rhythm. Maneuvering between cars, he made his way to the parking lot, hoping to find a standing customer. A dozen or two people with bags and suitcases crowded in line. But Nick knew that he couldn't get much from such passengers. The man waved his hand doomfully, thinking, "Yes, today I'm definitely a total bummer, considering that the day was wasted. At least I could cover the cost of fuel." He carefully turned onto a narrow strip of road leading to a patch of road where people were waiting for their turn. But suddenly, as if from under the ground, a man in a strong outfit with a briefcase in his hands rushed out in front of him. Nick was an experienced driver and had a good reaction. He hit the brakes, followed by a sharp screech of wheels of the inadequate man on the hood of his car with darting eyes. And Nick yelled at him, "Where are you going? Right under the wheels, or are you fed up with life?" The guy exhaled and quickly moved to the car door. He sat down confidently in the back seat. The briefcase he placed next to him. Only then did he utter, "Commander, don't swear, sorry, inconvenienced you. But I'm in a big hurry. An inconvenience. Are you really stupid? I almost crushed you. Are you burning up in one place?" The guy smiled, embarrassed. "No, I don't. My wife's having a baby. I had to leave on a business trip." Nick considered it a serious reason and slowed down a bit. "His wife is having a baby. It's important. Where do you want me to take you home?" "No, first home to the village of Sukhoi. That's over 100 kilometers." Nick was about to drop off the passenger, but he begged the commander, "Don't be so cruel. Imagine yourself in my shoes, and I'll pay for it and put a little extra on top." "Why so rich?" The guy smiled again. "He's not poor. He owns his own law firm. We got married just a year ago. The ultrasound said it's a boy. Congratulations." "Thank you. Honestly, it feels amazing. I've never been a father before. And then in one day, everything changed. Sometimes an hour, even a minute, can change a life. I know. I used to be a bit of a bad boy, too. How did you meet your Helen?" The guy started to talk about his happy life, and Nick couldn't get rid of the thought that he'd seen him somewhere before. No matter how hard he strained his memory, she wouldn't give him an answer. They were almost to this very village with a strange name when it suddenly clicked in his brain. It was the same kid that Zorka had seen off at the train station. His heart pounded frantically, and Nick hesitantly asked Happy Daddy, "Isn't your name Max by any chance?" The young man froze with amazement for a second, and then loudly barked, "That's right, Commander. Have we met before? That's why I see that your face looks familiar to me. Have you ever been here before?" Nick nodded. "I've been there. I lived there most of my adult life, and then I gave it all up." The lawyer sighed heavily. "I didn't make it either. And the main thing is, it was all my stupidity that made it happen. I don't even want to remember. Anyway, I was dating a cool girl. We went to uni together. Only she was 3 years younger than me. We planned to get married, but they say you can't plan anything in life." Nick felt a strange excitement and clung to the steering wheel. "So the knuckles won. And what's keeping you from getting married?" "Not what, but who is she?" "A femme fatale, Commander." "Do you believe there are women like that who ruin their lives?" Nick with a long voice wheezed. "I believe you. I had one of those too. I fell head over heels in love with her. And that's at the age of 45. It confirmed the proverb that the gray in the beard and the devil in the rib. And that love knocked me in the ribs. Lost my family, my job. Now I'm standing like this. You're really in a jam, Commander. I woke up in time to find out that my Kathy was tangling with a married man. I was running for my life. I wanted to reconnect with my girlfriend. She sent me away, and rightly so. The guy sighed expressively again and fell silent. Nick felt his mouth dry. It turns out that your fatal woman's name was Kathy. And you, Commander, who screwed up your life? Nick tried to hide his confusion behind laughter. I don't think you know her. My femme fatale lived in another city. I also spoiled everything. And then she dumped me like a boy. The passenger woke up and philosophically remarked, yes, women are mysterious creatures. With them you should always keep your nose to the wind. But I was very lucky to have met Helen. Her father is rich, but he brought up his daughter properly. She reminds me a lot of Kate, my first love. Nick hit the brakes, and the passengers almost fell to the floor. Chief, what are you doing? Robbing a young father. It's your own fault. You distracted me. Why do I need to know the details of your life? I've got enough problems of my own. It's all yours, Sukova or Sukotin, to shake out of the car. The young lawyer paid and disappeared into the darkness of the night. Nick looked back at the back seat and noticed their left Mac's briefcase. He had to jump out of the car and catch up with the happy father. Back in the driver's seat, Nick tried to gather his thoughts, but he couldn't concentrate on one thing at a time. He easily guessed that the random passenger was the same guy his daughter was dating. It turns out that Kathy was having an affair with both him and Kate's beau at the same time. The man whispered thoughtfully, "That's an interesting story, but I'm an old guard. How could I fall for such a divorce? How could I not immediately recognize this painted doll?" For 5 years, Nick tried to forget about his main mistake, which made him the most unhappy man in the world. To put it in literary terms, all these years he tried to turn the proverbial page, which is written about in thick novels. But to start life not from scratch, no matter how much he tried, he failed. Then, when everything collapsed, he often recalled that evening, when he humiliated his sick wife in one of the heater. The horror of it all was that it was Kathy's doing. He called Betty all sorts of names and then shoved her out the door. When Betty had sent copies of the contract in front of his nose, he hadn't believed it. He thought she'd made up that piece of paper herself. He thought then that his daughter had orchestrated the whole thing. After all, Kate was also a good master of various provocations. After his wife left, he called Kathy to tell her the good news. "Kathy is mine. I'm free. Congratulate me." They spent the night joking around in some diner on the outskirts of town. And in the morning, we drove together to his apartment. They spent a few magical days together. He was eager to share his plans for the future with Kathy. "Tomorrow I'm filing for divorce, and then you and I are going to spell everything out." He thought Kathy would sob on his chest with happiness. But she looked at him strangely and remained silent. The next day, Martin gathered all the staff in the small auditorium. "My friends, our globe is spinning and everything on it is changing. That means that nothing is permanent, no matter how hard you try. And you and I are in for a change, too." Nick, after a stormy night, was somewhere high in the clouds, and the words of the chief flew past him. But one of the foremen pushed him painfully in the side. "Nick, what are you afraid of? We're all being thrown out on the street, and he's crushing a block." Nick came down from the sky like he was on the street. On the other side, he got a mocking shout. "You shouldn't have entertained the chief's daughter. Engineer, you didn't have any luck either. He's selling our Paris. So the workers, in the eyes of the businessmen, their farm, say that with taxes he managed something, and he was offered a favorable deal, which he could not refuse." This information was confirmed. True, not all the workers were left out. Some of the new owner, that is, his representative, offered to stay. But Nikita Andreevich, no one offered a job at the company, in which he has invested his soul without exaggeration. He immediately remembered that damned paper and his wife's threats. And instead of falling at her feet and tearfully asking for forgiveness, he called and said some nasty things. Betty hung up on him, and a short time later, Kate called. "Daddy, I thought you were a smart man, and you ruined everything. Now Mom will never forgive you for anything in the world." He yelled into the phone, "I don't need your forgiveness. Leave me alone. Both of you." It was the last act of a play called Happy Family. Nick didn't immediately realize that it was only with Vetua and Kate that he was truly happy, and now there were only glimmers of that happiness. But these glimmers did not make his soul happy or sorrowful. The Martin thing soon took off somewhere. For about a month they met Kathy, and then she told Kathy, "I have to tell you that I'm getting married. My fiancé is a foreigner. He's the adopted son of one of Daddy's partners." This blow finally killed him with a job in his hometown. Nick didn't find one. Neighbors, acquaintances openly laughed at him. In order not to be an outgoing laughingstock, he sold his apartment and left for another region, as he could not afford to buy a decent place to live on the proceeds from the sale of the apartment. And he had to live on something, had to take the corner off, from behind the amplified signal of a motorist who couldn't make it to his house. Nick snapped out of the maelstrom of memories and gently touched down. The disgruntled drivers still decided to voice their outrage. "If I see you again in our village, I'll poke your tires." Nick muttered, "It's unlikely that fate will bring me here again. And in general, it's never too late, even at 50, to start over." It didn't work out. Once you have to go for a second try, third, fourth, you'll still get it someday. Kate ran out into the garden and looked around. "Anthony, have you seen my mom?" The still needle-dressed Betty's lawyer answered briefly, "They are in the gazebo." Sebastian decided to play a game of chess. "Yeah, Grandpa likes to rack his brain." "And who is he playing with?" "Mom doesn't know chess." The young man poems. He sat the janitor down. He seems to have some sense. "Kate, what's so urgent that you're looking for your mother? Would you rather watch Steph?" Kate looked at her husband unhappily. "You're a father, go look after your son. And I'm entitled to a vacation too. So, all day long, I'm running around like a weatherman. Anthony, I beg you." I also looked at my wife. "Kate, please don't start. We agreed to take care of our son. It's your turn." Then I've been switched for about 20 minutes. "Where do you think you're going?" "Nowhere." "I have to get my mom ready." Anthony's eyes sparkled. "Well, that's interesting. What are you up to again?" "I'm going to tell you." "You're going to watch." I said I'll watch. "Anthony, I've decided to reconcile my parents. Of course, I realize it's hopeless, but my dad should be here any minute. He and I have an agreement, but I have to get my mom ready so she doesn't faint. And my grandfather could ruin everything." The young woman was already heading toward the gazebo, but her husband stopped her. "Kate, there's no need to interfere. They'll sort it out themselves. And Sebastian, he's old, but he's not showing signs of dementia yet." Kate looked at her husband in disbelief. "Anthony, you have no idea how much effort I've put into this meeting. And if it goes wrong, it will be a disaster." A car appeared on the road leading to the village. Kate clutched her hands to her chest. "Anthony, he's coming. Look, get Steph down here." The father will see his grandson make a break for it, and the mother will see him crying and forgive him. "Kate, you definitely made the wrong career choice. Should you have gone into directing? It's my fault I'm good at it." Nick walked uncertainly along the path leading to the mansion, and the farther he got from the gate, the more anxious he became. There was a traitorous thought somewhere near his temple. "You shouldn't be doing this. She'll send you away, Betty, and rightly so, for you don't deserve her forgiveness." The first to notice the guest was the host chess partner. "It seems you have a visitor." Betty was reading a book while the men were thinking of moves, so she didn't notice Nick until after her father had slapped her lightly on the arm. "The party. Aren't there two pretty girls going out?" The women, barely audible, mumbled mine. But how did he know? And why did he come here? After all he had done, he dared to come here. Sebastian said sternly to Betty, "You be careful, you know righteous people are rare. 1 or 2 at a time. You have to be able to forgive. That's what God says. You forgave me, but you're my father's blood, and he's your daughter's father. Help me get out of here. I don't want to disturb you." The janitor volunteered to help Kirillovich's master. "Jana, what can I get you when you ask?" He stood there and didn't dare to look her in the eye. Betty, on the contrary, looked at her husband with pity. "You've lost a lot of weight. Life's been a little rough. You have a grandson." "I know I do. Kate told me. She found me. You know, she's the boss of us." Suddenly, he's got his hands up to the sky. "Betty's not talking about that. That's not what I'm talking about. Forgive me, for God's sake. I can't. I'm alone." "I'm sorry." He fell to her lap and began kissing her hands. At some point, Betty felt that her hands were wet. She realized with horror that they were tears. Her heart clenched with pity and pain, and a thought pounded in her head. But why exactly did I have to endure all this? Two of the dearest people betrayed me first and then apologized to me. She dropped her hand to her husband's head. "Don't, Nick, stand up. Look, Kate's steak is coming. It's time you met your grandson." He whispered quietly, "Betty, will you forgive me?" "I don't know yet, but I'll try." She knew very well that she had waited for this day in secret. Hoped he would be, but he didn't want to talk about it. Though there was pain on her heart, the moment Betty saw her husband, she realized how much she missed him.
Subscribe and click the bell.
Austin. Norman has been married to young Iris for a little over 5 years. The young girl's affair with the middle-aged man did not last long. Austin got used to married life. When his wife filed for divorce and asked to vacate their common house, it was as if the whole world turned upside down for him. Austin could not imagine his life without his family and children. He has to come to terms with the new reality. He also loves his son Eric very much. A couple years after the divorce, Austin was able to buy himself a house in an old village. After buying the house, the first thing he did was take his son Eric to live with him. Eric was very happy to live with his father. They had a lot in common. They communicate like best friends. After some more time, Norman told his son that he was tired of loneliness and wanted to get married. The acquaintance with his new fling took place in a restaurant. Eric hoped to see a woman about his father's age, but a bright young woman came to meet him. She seemed to be the same age as Eric or older by only a couple of years. She was also very pretty. At first glance, Iris seemed like a quiet, calm girl. But it wasn't until a few months later that it became clear to Eric that she wasn't so simple. There is definitely some kind of power in her that conquers people even with a silent look. Eric did not like it, because it was these properties Iris began to interfere with the relationship between father and son. The father began to devote little time to his son. And after all, he now has such a crucial moment in his life. He studies well at the university, began to develop his business in parallel. He really needs a good companion. And the father spends all his free time with his young wife. One day there was an event that made Norman reconsider his attitude to his son and to his young wife. Norman had his own brokerage firm, with an office located in the central part of the city. It was only an hour's drive from the township of Istok. After lunch, Norman felt that he didn't feel like working at all, so he decided to come home early, and he was not expected home at that moment. Change his shoes in the hallway. Norman heard Iris and Eric talking. "Eric, have you thought about the baby? He's gonna want to know the truth later. And anyway, I don't think it's fair," Boris said. "Don't worry, I'll think of something. The main thing is that nobody knows about it yet. By the way, how are things going with that issue? Any progress?" Eric asked. "I'm watching. Everything is going according to plan. No one's really trying to take your place," said Iris. At that moment, Norman came into the kitchen. Iris was happy to see her husband early and kissed him and invited him to the table. Eric was less friendly. He wished his father and stepmother a pleasant evening and left. Norman did not directly ask his wife the gist of the conversation. He decided to handle the matter professionally. A couple of weeks later, a private detective sat in Norman's office and laid out the photos in front of him. "Mr. Norman, we've been able to find out something. It is true that your son and your wife occasionally meet on neutral territory, but we can't yet say what they talk about or what their goals are. We need more time," said the detective. "Well, then keep watching. I expect details as soon as possible, Norman said. The village of Istok is located at the foot of the mountain. It doesn't have many residents, but it has its own atmosphere. There is a good tradition of planting perennial trees wherever possible. Thanks to this tradition, it is always beautiful here. The roads are paved with natural stone. Frequent rains wash away all the dust, car wheels so polish, and these stones that they sparkle at any time of the day. Along the narrow village roads, wardens are set up in treacherous metal and painted in a single calm color. Residents make sure that the pupils' lamps are always clean and working properly. At every turn, along the narrow central road, gazebos made of OREWOD wood have been installed. True, rarely anyone sits there. The people of Stoke are mostly homebodies. They rarely gather outside and do not disturb each other without a reason. Houses are spaced far enough apart. For lack of enemies and criminals, the fence here is decorative in nature. The gates are never locked. In the summer, Stoke constantly blows a light breeze, and in the evenings you can hear the flow of the mountain river, to which you can walk for 5 minutes. Along the river, there are green lawns everywhere, on which young people like to hold fun parties at night, and the villagers dislike these visiting parties the most. They disturb their sleep. At the entrance to the village, there is an old chapel, the history of which goes back to the Middle Ages. The chapel has been guarded by a lonely old man all his life. He died recently, and now his faithful four-legged friend, Box, roams around the chapel. But there is no one to watch over the chapel. The villagers have met several times and agreed to take turns guarding the chapel, but no one honors the agreement, and the need to honor the tradition is urgent. It is not even discussed. This is the only pressing problem of this village. There's a second problem for the village, and that's the car ball, and Norman's son Eric. Eric was recently given a new Cadillac by his father. Now he drives his car day and night. Eric has a temper. He likes to make a ruckus and scandal out of nothing. The residents think it's because of his addiction to alcohol and other kinds of stupefied states of mind. But Eric lets everyone know that he doesn't like anyone even sober. Today, as luck would have it, it's Eric's turn to guard the chapel. Freddie, a local activist, has been chasing him around for a week, asking him to remember to come to the chapel in the evening and receive him properly. The other residents laugh at Freddie. How many times do you run after Eric? He still won't come to do this important tradition. Young people are irresponsible these days. They don't honor tradition, and they don't think about the future. This Eric will once again find an excuse to shirk his sacred duty. That's what the villagers of Listock thought. Eric didn't forget his sacred duty. Toward lunchtime, he drove his Cadillac to Freddie's house and asked him to keep the keys to the chapel. At precisely 5:00 p.m., I'll be waiting for you. There's a young man there, Freddie promised. No, that won't do. Come back at 4:00 p.m. I'll be ready to take chapel by then. Also, the next day, you don't have to be here by 900. How do you usually do it? You can come closer to lunchtime. I'm in no hurry to get anywhere, Eric said. Before, he was surprised at the untypical behavior of the local troublemaker, but he interpreted it as a good thing. Suddenly, the young man reconsidered his views and came to his senses. That happens to a lot of people. Everything happened as agreed. Only Freddie was awakened in the night by the screaming of the neighbors. Someone was yelling from the street to call the fire department and the paramedics. As Freddie pulled himself together and ran out of his house, all his neighbors were galloping away. Even yard dogs, small children, and sick old people were running. The chapel's on fire. That's bad luck. The chapel burned more than 180 years ago. Then it was the precursor to a series of floods. And the chapel burned before that, 234 years ago. Immediately after that event, there was a massive earthquake. And then there was a war. A wall and old men clutching at their hearts. That's not good. It shouldn't have happened. We should not have allowed such a significant disaster for our village. The women grumbled. Only Eric sat aside on the curb and took a slow drag on a Cuban cigar, stroking the figure of his friend, who had fallen asleep from the amount of liquor drunk right on the lawn. He had fun watching those pesky people stir and fuss in an attempt to put out the fire. The fools would have slept on. No chapel, no more trouble, thought Eric, and took a big gulp of whiskey straight from the neck of the bottle. The fire was out. People were starting to worry. Where was Norman's son Eric, who was an old-timer that evening? Had the young lad died inside the chapel? Norman had been against having anyone guarding the chapel from the beginning. Freddie had spent an hour talking him down, convincing him that the good traditions of the village must be preserved. How would Freddie look his friend in the eye now? The crowd was stirring again and actively discussing something among themselves. At this point, Eric decided to lie down and rest next to his girlfriend. Eric had hoped that after the fire, the villagers would have no more problems and each of them would live their own lives. But he had clearly underestimated them. 3 days later, they gathered again at the old church and began to discuss how they would rebuild the chapel and how they would protect it from fires. None of them realized that Eric had set the fire on purpose, and he would do it as many times as he wanted. Tired of arguing about rebuilding the chapel, the residents decided to disperse today, and the problem will be solved next weekend when all the residents will feel in the appropriate spirit. Dispersing, Freddie and Norman walked down the main street. Norman hadn't been outside his garden for a long time. Today was the first time he had seen the outskirts of the settlement this year. There used to be an old abandoned house at the end of the street where no one lived. True, old Betty had told everyone that ghosts gathered in that abandoned house every night and held a coven. Nothing else is known about the house. The owners had either moved to town or sold the house. And today Norman noticed a new house 3 times the size of the old one has replaced the old one, and the roof is covered with pizza. In these areas, it was common to use broken skull structures, used by the most noble of families. Freddie, I don't get it. Are they building a new house here? Asked Norman. Don't you know what's going on? Freddie asked in a whisper. They say that the old haunted house bought the billionaire Edgar Nelson himself. He's going to move here, live here. They say he has a little time left. Freddie added. That's it. You're sure it's Edgar Nelson? Why did he choose our village? Asked Norman. Edgar shrugged his shoulders. Nelson was a hero of his era. This man is known for making a huge fortune in his younger years and doing a lot of good for society. After becoming an adult, he began to give lectures to students. Then people realized that Mr. Edgar was not only rich in money, but also in knowledge and wisdom. By his mature years, Edgar Nelson had become a true legend of his time. Even the most influential persons listened to his opinion. Without his participation, no important issue in the country was not solved. And so the people of this village were lucky to have him. Now this man of legend will be their neighbor. No matter how great a man he was, this Edgar Norman for some reason did not feel the joy of a new neighborhood, looking out for all the new residents. It's another tradition of this village. But Mr. Edgar would certainly win all the attention of the locals, and there's no telling what legends they'll start making about him. Norman came home with these thoughts. At that moment he again found his young wife Iris and his son Eric in the living room talking animatedly. Eric, feelings, emotions are all fleeting things. In such matters you have to think with your head and only then take action. You're still very young. You may not know the ins and outs of everything. So follow my advice, Iris says. I'm not only young, I'm handsome. Or don't you agree? Eric seems to be flirting with his stepmother, but it's undeniable. He's a handsome man, Iris tells him. As soon as they heard Norman's footsteps, the conversation stopped. Iris pretended that she had been waiting for her husband for a long time. Eric seemed to be going somewhere. He was dressed smartly and smelled of expensive perfume. It's a little different from his everyday outfit. Dad, you and I need to have a serious talk sometime, Eric said, when he got right to the front door. Let's talk now. I'm free now. while Iris is setting the table for us," said Father. "No, another time though. I'm expected now. I'll be late," said Eric, already closing the front door. His last words came from the street. Norman had been trying to keep his cool all evening and not show any signs of jealousy, and Iris kept asking him what he was so excited about and why he was so nervous. Norman only thought that tomorrow the first thing to do was to contact the detective and learn about the progress of surveillance of his closest people. He was afraid to think any further. "Dude, why are you so sad?" asked Eric, his friend Jeffrey. As usual, they're out tonight at one of the bars in town. This is Eric Jeffrey's favorite place, his closest friend. Guys don't keep secrets from each other. "You know what my home situation and prospects are like," Eric said. "Still the same stepmother?" Jeffrey asked. "Yes, I'm trying to provoke her and find some reason for a scandal. But dude, it's not working." Eric's got his hands up in the air. "What about Dad?" Jeffrey asked. "And he spends all his time with her, as usual. In all likelihood, they're even planning a child. She's young and will have more than one. And then what will be left to me? My father's accounts and business, so it's been losing value over the last few years. And if he has, say, 3 children, it's not an inheritance, but some change for me," Eric said. "So you can't get rid of your stepmother?" Jeffrey asked. "No, I'm not. I deliberately talk to her about delicate subjects, so that she gets emotionally involved, so that my father will catch her flirting with me." "Well, Dad doesn't see or hear all that," Eric said. "And try a change of tactics. If verbal and provocation doesn't work on her, then try pretending that you have a crush on her as a woman. Show different signs of attention. Pretend that you are courting her. Trust me, women are addicted to these things. She's gonna let her emotions get in the way of your father. And that's when he'll kick her to the curb. Or maybe he'll think twice and decide to make up with your mother. After all, a woman of her age won't cause as much trouble as a younger woman." Jeffrey's advice. "I was thinking the same thing. What if my father decides to take her side and makes an enemy of me? Then I'd lose my chance forever," Eric said. "Even if he thinks that, it won't be for long. I know your dad. He's a normal dude. He understands a man's rules well, and men will never fight amongst themselves over a woman. Not even father and son. Even if he gets upset, it'll be for a while. And then you'll make up," Jeffrey said. Meanwhile, to Mr. Norman, the private investigator reported that the surveillance was continuing, but no significant clues could be found. Mr. Norman then decided to do a little investigation of his own. He invited his young wife Iris to a restaurant in the middle of a romantic evening. Norman as if casually began the conversation, "Iris dear, I have long been unable to find time to spend with my son. I think he's growing apart from me. What do you think is going on in his life right now? Is there anything bothering him?" Mr. Norman asked. "That's right, you're really pulling away from him. I think he even blames me for all this, but he talks to me willingly, tells me about his girlfriends. He often consults with me about current affairs. I try to be friendly with him, but realize that no one can take your place in his life. So you should find a way to communicate with him at least once in a while," Iris replied. "But overall, what do you think? He's not such a bad guy. I mean, the neighbors like to complain about his difficult personality. He's just like his mom. He's an adult. He can't be changed. Wouldn't his temper get in the way of his relationships with women?" Norman asked a leading question. "You've given him the best you can. Everyone has their strengths and weaknesses, including your son. I wouldn't say he's hopeless or unbearable. And the neighbors might say that out of jealousy. All in all, you have raised a fine son," Iris replied. After these words, Norman sank deeper into his doubts. His young wife speaks quite positively about his son. Can this be regarded as sympathy? Or is Iris just trying to be polite? Why did he overhear this conversation? The news that Mr. Edgar had already moved into his new home quickly spread through the village, the villagers looking out of their windows to catch a glimpse of the man of legend. The young people were arguing about which automobile he most often drove. This mysterious man interested all indifferent nay, except Norman. And Iris was home alone when Freddie came in. "You and your husband and his son Eric are invited to visit tonight," Freddie said. "Secretary Edgar Nelson himself has become our new neighbor. He's throwing a banquet for his housewarming party tonight. He wants to meet everyone in the village," Freddie said. Iris got excited. She remembered the not-too-distant past, and Iris and her friends were just beginning their modeling careers. There was such a secret competition in their circle as dating the cool worms. The most self-confident models boldly put on their list of the most successful men in the country and did not miss a single social party to get acquainted with any of them. And Iris was one such huntress. She had tried several times to make her way into the society of this Mr. Edgar, but she had failed. Then she took a close look at him and decided that he was kind of boring for a legendary person. At the same time, Iris dated various promising guys until she met Norman, an entrepreneur. Unlike the young, spoiled by the female attention of guys, the mature Norman was reliable. He had then already converted his relationship with his wife into an amicable one. According to him, Sarah did not mind it at all. On the contrary, she was glad to finally have her freedom. It was Norman who suffered for family harmony and the usual way of life. That's how spontaneously Iris found herself married to a middle-class businessman. At the moment when she had time to get used to stability in relationships and predictability right under the side, appears such a trophy as Edgar Nelson. And he invites her to visit. Usually these people are very private. And Edgar must have decided that this village is home to ordinary people and not to be shut out. "Oh, honey, we're invited to a banquet tonight at our new neighbor's house," Iris announced over the phone. "Is that old geezer calling?" "No, I'll pass. I'm not gonna waste my time with a con artist like that," Norman said. "What makes you think he's a con man?" "It's all rumors and media speculation. They're usually people just like you and me." "Well, please, let's go." He invited Erica too, insisted, and through. After a long argument, Iris failed to persuade her husband to go together, but he agreed that she would go with Eric. They will briefly sit at the table, exchange a few phrases with this famous man, and then quickly return home. And Iris put on her best dress to meet her new neighbor. That's what all the other neighbors thought. In fact, all of her dresses were just as good. Mr. Edgar was surprisingly indifferent to women's beauty. He didn't even pay much attention to Iris. He thought someone had come with a teenage child. When the guests were served the second hot dish, Mr. Edgar asked for a moment of the audience's attention. Then he stood up and made a statement that left everyone speechless. "I am very happy to be a neighbor to such wonderful people. Believe me, I've lived in a lot of places, and I still do. I'm a pretty good judge of character. You're special. You make for a very interesting life. That's why I chose this village as my final resting place in this world. Few people know that I've been fighting an insidious disease for many years. I know that my outcome is near. Many people have a question about my inheritance. Who will inherit my money? I have no children and no other loved ones. I would like the honor of inheriting from one of you," Edgar said and paused. The guests froze, waiting for him to continue his speech. "But there is one interesting condition. I want to know two special persons among you. The best villager and the worst," said Edgar. The guests looked at each other and began to whisper among themselves. Some laughed, some were puzzled, some thought the old man was joking. "Mr. Edgar, how do you know who among us is the worst and who is the best?" asked the same curious Freddie. "Well, that's what we're going to talk about now. I will draw my conclusions from your feedback. From now on, and for the next 6 months, you can write me letters or come to a personal meeting to tell me about the worst and the best person among you. We will summarize the results in 2 stages. The first stage, in 3 months, we will determine the worst. That is, you can tell me about the worst person first, and for the next 3 months you and I together will look for the best of the best," Edgar said. What's the point of all this? Is it dismissive? Asked Eric, who until then had been sitting idly watching the others. Good question, my friend. To the best of you, I will give $1 million. And whoever you appoint as the worst will have to guard your chapel for a year. By the way, I've allocated the money to restore it, and now it's a novelty. Do these conditions suit you? Mr. Edgar asked. Yes, it's a fascinating game. I'm curious, why not? Such phrases were heard from the crowd. Mr. Edgar understood that the audience accepted the terms of the game, and from tomorrow, all the most interesting things begin. And Iris came home in two bright feelings. Eric had been incredibly amused. What a quirky old man. He's obviously up to something and wants to fool everyone. And these gullible people believed him. He laughed. When he heard about the bet Mr. Edgar Norman had started, he was once again outraged. I guessed even from a distance that he is not the holy man he claims to be. He is a fraud and an impostor. He came here to sow confusion, grumbled Mr. Norman all evening, and was curious as to what would happen next. It was only a week before Minister Edgar's mailbox was full of letters. No sooner had he read them than people started coming to him themselves to tell him about the worst man in the village. The first was the very same Freddie, a local activist. He came with a whole list. So, Mr. Edgar, I have lived in this village for over 20 years, and I know every resident, and I know their whole background. If you're still interested, you listen. I'm very interested in Freddie telling me everything in detail. I want to know about everyone, Mr. Edgar said and stared at him. One of the worst people, I would say, is Norman Austin. He lives 3 houses down from you. Strange. I don't know anyone like that yet. Mr. Edgar wondered. That's right. He's a very secretive man, settled here only 3 years ago. He bought the house from some old people, remodeled it completely. He's lived here for 3 years, and none of us know anything about him. But we know he's got a young wife. He's got a son with a nasty temper. He's got a dog, that sort of thing. And the rest is a mystery. What exactly do you dislike about him? Mr. Edgar asked. All the other residents don't hide anything from each other. This one leaves early in the morning in his automobile as if from another planet. He arrives late. You don't see him around here much. In our community, normal men go out in the evenings and share the latest news, talk about soccer and women. This mister here is a little too mysterious. I think it's because he's got something to hide. There's a reason he changed his residence and his wife to a new one when he was older. He's obviously got some skeletons in his closet. That's why this man is first on my list. Freddie said. He'll pass, and that's it. Or do you have some kind of personal score to settle with this man? I have personal scores too. I asked him for a loan once. He gave it to me, but I paid him back in time. But you know, I think he gave it to me with such an arrogant look. He obviously thinks badly of us, of the other villagers. For example, when you had your housewarming party, he didn't come to you. Do you know why? Because he treats all people badly. That's another confirmation of what I said. Okay, who else is on your list? Minister Edgar asked. Next on my list is his son Eric, who is a big boy, but he's a troublemaker. His father bought him a brand new Cadillac. So this young man, instead of doing something useful, he rides around in that car all day long. He also tracks down the prettiest girls in our village, has fun with them a couple times, and then forgets about their fate. I suppose these girls will write to you about him in general too. This guy deserves the closest attention, Freddie said. Next on the list. Mr. Edgar listened attentively to his interlocutor. Next on the list is the worst person. I consider this Norman's young wife. And Iris is a model-looking girl who married a man who was old enough to be her father. I think she got together with him for a reason. It must be a matter of calculation. Immorality is a violation of morality. Freddie sounded like the leader of a political movement at a party meeting. Is there anyone else in your disfavor? Mr. Edgar remained at attention. Of course there is. It's our cop Andrew. He's not doing his job well. Mr. Edgar asked. No, no one has any complaints about his duties or his professionalism, but he's not friendly. A year ago, there was an accident at one of the houses. At that time, a cop, Andrew, was working 3 days straight at the house. Now, when I and other villagers came up to him and asked him about the details of the accident, he kept it from us. So this man clearly has bad thoughts about us and is carefully hiding it. So the fourth bad man in this village is a cop, Andrew. So we'll put that down. Who's next? Freddie was so engrossed in his list that he didn't realize a couple hours had passed. He came to his senses when he noticed Mr. Edgar falling asleep in his seat intermittently from his stories. Freddie thought that Mr. Edgar himself must not be such a good person if he couldn't even listen to his fascinating story about all the inhabitants. Mr. Edgar's next visitor was a woman named Grace, who has also lived in this village for over 20 years. She did not have a list. What she did have was the absolute certainty that she was the one who knew the worst person in the village. "This is my ex-husband, Even," Grace said shyly. "He left me with 2 kids and moved into his parents' old house. He lives there alone now. Sometimes he goes to church, sometimes he gets drunk and lies in the street. He absolutely refuses to live with us." Grace said, "In all likelihood, your ex-husband is really not a good man. What would you wish for him?" Mr. Edgar asked. "Can you not be shy in your expressions and thoughts? I guarantee full understanding," added Mr. Edgar. "I would wish for him to suffer just as I suffered in my marriage to him." "Oh, how? I thought you were suffering without him." Mr. Edgar asked. "I suffer without him too, but I suffered with him too. The thing is, I married Ivan early on, but then he went to serve in the army, and from there he came back as a strange man. He lived with us for a while, and then he left." Minister Edgar listened carefully to Grace's words, and the former even wrote something down, then escorted the offended woman home. When there was another free time, Mr. Edgar unexpectedly came to visit the very one who abandoned his family and drags with different women. Even was home alone. He was taken aback by the unexpected guest of honor. In the house there are certainly empty bottles and dirty things lying everywhere. Even himself doesn't look like the happiest person in the world. While Mr. Edgar sat in Evan's living room and watched the arrangement of his space, a certain woman came out of the next room with a perplexed look at Mr. Edgar, then headed sharply toward the exit. Even caught up with her and asked her something. Obviously, he wanted to keep her for a while longer, but the woman was in a hurry. "Ivan, you and I have known each other for a while. I came to see you to get to know you better. How are you doing?" Mr. Edgar asked, and he was at a complete loss. He was very worried about his reputation among people. His departure from the family was received with condemnation by the others. Everyone said he'd be lost without the support of the strong Grace. But Even had his own plans and his own vision of life. He was determined to prove something to the contrary. He needed a little time. Except this visit from Mr. Edgar was not a good idea. There's no telling what he'll tell the others about him. "I've been doing all kinds of things. I live like everybody else. It's true I have some difficulties in my life, but I'll get over them." Even started making excuses. "Don't worry, it's okay. Maybe you could get $1 million from me and rebuild your life. That's what I'm talking about. Your ex-wife came to see me. She thinks you're the worst person in the village because you abandoned your family and moved into your parents' old house. I was curious to see the worst man amongst my own. That is, in fact, what I am here," said Mr. Edgar in a soft tone. And Ivan sat silent for a long time. Mr. Edgar realized that he had stepped on something very painful for this man. He didn't expect the reaction to be so strong. He was clearly distressed about something. "To be honest, my Grace wasn't telling you the whole truth." Finally, Even started talking. "Actually, it all started when I came back from military service. It changed me a lot. I became very nervous, and I had a hard time tolerating others. My wife probably didn't tell you all this. I had a hard time sleeping at night. I kept waking up with nightmares. I told Grace I needed time and space to recover, but she thought I had fallen out of love with her. I walked away from my family to shut them out of my life. I knew that just a little bit more and I could hurt them, raise my hand, or start insulting them. I'm here to sort myself out, to become that calm and upbeat person. I don't know how to do that, but I believe that someday it will happen, and I'll get back to my loved ones. In the meantime, yes, I am a bad person. I know it myself, Even said, and cried like a little child. Mr. Edgar sat in Evan's house for a long time. Eventually he realized that this man had indeed become so small in his soul that he could not stand to be around other people. Mr. Edgar nodded his head repeatedly. When Ivan talked about himself, he had long ago guessed that some events, even insignificant at first glance, can make a person very small in his eyes. Such a person becomes quite embittered. Since the little beast inside is frightened, he is constantly on guard and cannot relax for a minute. Ivan turned out to be actually not a bad person, and unhappy Mr. Edgar promised to help him in the future. And for himself, he decided that the bad should be sought elsewhere. The next guests surprised Mr. and Edgar very much. There were about 10 of them. They were all teenagers of this village. We found out that you can be told about the best people of this village. If you don't tell our secret to anyone, we are ready to point out the worst person to you, said one of the teenagers. Minister Edgar became very interested. He gave the teenagers the floor and sat in a chair with a pencil and paper in his hands. All the adults in this village are the worst people in the world. They don't understand us. They think we are still children, but we are no longer children, said the first teenager. Then the second of them reached out his hand and stepped forward. Apparently, he too had a problem with adults. And in some cases, we're asked to be adults, even though we're not adults, said the second teenager. What do they want from you? Mr. Edgar asked. The teens hesitated, and each began to list a different thing. They want us to be able to do everything, everywhere. And we don't have any rights. They make us do things we don't like. They make us study subjects that won't do us any good in the future. It's as if they have forgotten that they themselves come from childhood. They steal our freedom and limit our development, the teenagers said with one voice. Mr. Edgar thought deeply. When he announced his bet, he didn't think the kids would be interested in it either. But since the rules were getting complicated, Mr. Edgar decided to accept them. He asked, "And can you specifically give me the names of people who can be categorized as the worst?" That's my mom, Grace. That's my dad, Evan, my dad, Freddie, my grandmother, Betty. Our neighbor Norman's teacher, Ted, Mr. Cobb. It seems these young men and women have decided to list all the residents of this village in 3 generations. Mr. Edgar wrote down all the names and then thanked the young activists and escorted them out of his house. The game is gaining very interesting momentum, he said to himself, and shook his head. Mr. Edgar's next destination was the local school. There he got to know the teacher, Ted, better. Just that day, there was a school parent meeting. All the adults who had children, school children, were gathered in the hall. Ted addressed them and outlined a number of problems. They were typical of any school. Ted spoke very emotionally. One of the parents objected to him, demanding even more discipline than there is now. Then Ted said that children should be given more space for freedom, that they have the right to decide about their free time. He also talked a lot about the peculiarities of growing up. From time to time, he reminded the parents that they too were children and experienced difficulties. In the end, the impression was that Ted was completely on the side of the children. The parents were satisfied. For Mr. Edgar, it wasn't enough. After all the conversations, he stayed at the school a little longer and talked to Ted personally. Returning home, he was sure that Ted was not the worst person in the village, and the parents showed no signs of cruelty. But the children were right about something too. As Mr. Edgar gathered a history on each resident in the Norman household, something strange was happening. And Iris noticed that Eric had also spent all night last night at a nightclub toward morning, and had come in drunk, and was still asleep. In the morning, when Norman was leaving for work, he asked him to tell him to have Eric at his office by lunchtime, and Iris decided to give this to Eric closer to lunchtime. When she went into his room on the second floor, Eric was already out of bed. "Eric, good morning. Your dad told me to tell you to report to his office. He said it was serious," Iris said, and hurried back out of his room. But Eric blocked her way. "Wait, Iris, you don't have to run away from me. If anyone needs to talk, it's you and me," he said, and stepped closer to her. It was that awful moment that Iris had been dreading all along. She has been walking like the tip of a needle since the beginning of her married life, so as not to provoke this spoiled guy. Iris felt perfectly well that the previous frank conversations and attempts to draw out of her some emotions and other things are all tricks of this guy. She realizes that Norman frankly pays more attention to her and spends little time with his son. But the son never assumes that his father is doing this willingly. He sees his stepmother as a major rival. And yes, Eric is in close contact with his mother. She's probably there to give him a lot of pointers on how to gain more space in his father's life. Even though she has no intention of returning to her beloved husband, sharing his privileges with another woman is particularly reluctant. No matter how hard Iris tries to maneuver, now she's on the verge of a major trap. "Eric, please don't cross the line. It will end badly for both of us." Iris tried to push him away from her and headed for the exit. "You think I'm a little kid and don't notice anything. I've been seeing it all for a long time. The way you've been grooming me from all sides. I know your plans are devious. You want to compromise me in my father's eyes. That's why I'm maneuvering like a knife edge. But you don't have to fear any of this if you obey me. I won't tell your father about your open provocations if you stay close to me," Eric insisted. "What are you talking about? Eric, this is crazy. It's not my fault. Please stop acting like a capricious child." Iris was getting seriously worried. "What kind of provocation are you talking about? I'm only trying to be on friendly terms with you. You and I have one person in common. He's close to you and me. What makes you think I have a personal affection for you?" Iris raised her voice to you. "Oh, come on. Your flashy outfits, your clever facial expressions, your smiles. I've been noticing it for a long time. Don't worry, don't worry. No one will ever find out." Eric continued to hold Iris' hand. After a short verbal altercation, Iris gathered all her strength into a fist, and she managed to break free from Eric's hands. She ran swiftly down the stairs until she took one wrong step and rolled headlong down the stairs. Eric heard a rumble and ran out following her down the stairs, and there lay the girl's frail body with blood running from her nose. Eric came running and picked her up and put her on the couch in the living room. He was terrified. He had no idea how to give a person help in cases like this. In a hurry, he ran into the kitchen, struggled to find the home first aid kit, but it contained only neatly folded bandages and nothing else. So Eric ran to the phone to call a doctor. But he realized that the doctor would not arrive here soon. It was almost an hour's drive from the city to the village. Eric decided to drive Iris to the hospital in his car. Why did I listen to Jeff? She was the one who fell down the stairs when she was scared of me. I wasn't really going to touch her. What kind of day is this? Thought Eric as he stepped on the gas of his car. Meanwhile, Iris's face had turned blue and tinged, and her body was hanging out of the back seat of the car like a bag of vegetables. When my father finds out, I can't avoid trouble. She might tell him why she ran up the stairs like that, too, right? Eric thought, and he felt even more uneasy. Meanwhile, Mr. Edgar's experiment continues. Several people come to him every day to tell him the worst behaviors and traits of their acquaintances, friends, or just fellow villagers. And Edgar was greatly surprised when a group of teenagers came to him. He hadn't expected such an active response. And today, he was even more surprised when a local cop came to see him. Turns out he knows who the worst person in this village is. Mr. Edgar, I know how to end crime in any community. It takes the good work of the so-called vice squad. In this case, It's the rector of the church. And instead of educating people, he collects money from the church and organizes religious festivals. Meanwhile, people often steal, beat each other up, damage each other's property, all because the churchmen are not doing their duties well enough. I don't think God will forgive him for that either. He himself says, "It is better to receive his punishment on earth than in heaven after death." I followed his idea of appointing him the worst inhabitant of this village, and let him do the dirtiest work in our village. It will be better for him than burning in hell after death, the cop said. Minister Edgar listened attentively and was struck by the depth of Kova's arguments. "You have been another revelation to me," Mr. Edgar said, and wrote down all of Kova's arguments in his notebook. Hearing such a serious accusation, Mr. Edgar decided a few days later to visit the churchman in person and talk to him. When he arrived, indeed, the church was empty, with no one present. "Father, why is there no one in the church on the day of service?" Minister Edgar asked. "You know, these are the times. People have turned away from God. They have sold their souls to the devil and become dependent on the poor world, and they don't have the time or energy to go to church. A couple of years ago, one of the active ones even proposed to demolish this church and build a nightclub instead. God save us from such a thing," said the rector and crossed himself. "Are you saying that people have forgotten about God?" Mr. Edgar asked. "That's exactly what I'm saying, but it's not their fault. God loves people infinitely. The proof of this love is the fact that he gave mankind the devil. What are you saying, Father? How does that make sense? How can the devil be a gift to human beings?" Minister Edgar marveled. "It's very simple. God gave the devil so that man could blame all his sins on him. It is a great opportunity to repent every time after committing a sin and every time to return to the abode of the Holy Father," said the abbot. "Yes, you're right. There is something in it. Father, may I ask you a question?" Mr. Edgar asked. "I'm all ears. One of the important people in this village came to see me yesterday. If you know, I recently asked the people of this village to identify the worst person among them. Well, this important man thinks the worst person is you. Do you know why? Because you don't preach well enough, and people fall into sin through ignorance," said Mr. Edgar. A fellow cop pressed me. "It was expected. We have an old conflict with this man. When I was a young man, there lived in our neighborhood an unprecedented beauty named Aria. I was young, handsome, educated, and rich, and a fellow cop at the time was starving. Both of us were attracted to this beautiful girl Aria, but the beautiful maiden chose me as her beau over the cop. He and I have been secret enemies ever since, so don't believe a word he says against me. It's because of youthful resentment and jealousy," the priest said. "Ah, that's how it is. Interesting story. As far as I know, you are now living about a beautiful girl. Arise no, in your life?" Mr. Edgar asked. "Yes, that's right. My love turned out to be miserable. I didn't know who I was involved with. This beautiful girl turned out to be a companion. I found out about it very late. When I found out, I was already hopelessly fixed with her. I did everything I could to get her on the right path and stop sinning. But all was in vain. Suffering from heartaches, I acquired a host of diseases, body and mind. And in the end, she left me anyway and chose a licentious lifestyle. She still hosts rich gentlemen to this day. When I look at all this, I am weak and feeble. On days like this, I'm not even able to preach," the priest said. "Father, do you think this is a beautiful area, good man or bad man?" Mr. Edgar asked. "How can a companion and a traitor be a good person? My whole life has gone down the drain because of her. Even now, after she is long gone from my life, she continues to live in the house across the street and do dishonor to me. Every time I look at her, I feel how far from holiness I am," the priest said, and his voice became agitated. Mr. Edgar had a very interesting picture in his mind. The culprit was a certain grandmother who had led a vicious life many years ago in her distant youth. Now we should talk to this beautiful girl. Arya thought to himself, Mr. Edgar. A few days later, he visited this woman by name. He expected to see a beautiful girl, but he made a slight mistake in his introduction. The now beautiful girl had turned into a charismatic woman of mature age. From the looks of it, you couldn't tell that she was the source of the falling morals of this entire village. Arya greeted her guest in a very flirtatious manner. I heard that an honorable gentleman like you has settled in our village. I've been looking for a chance to get to know you. And this is such an unexpected, pleasant meeting, she said. I've never heard anything about you. I wonder why your fellow villagers didn't mention a fine woman like you. Mr. Edgar got in on the act. That's a good thing. I know a lot of them are jealous of me. They're afraid that all your attention will be on me. They only want to make the most of you on their own account. And how are you doing? How is your life going? Mr. Edgar asked, slowly looking around the interior of Arya's dwelling. Everything here spoke for itself. The fiery red walls hinted at passions. On the wall are elegant candle holders with candles blazing and a light fragrance. On the table are 2 sparkling glasses waiting for the clear wine that Apple always has in stock. Nearby lie some other sweets in beautiful wrappers. The woman herself is dressed in a long, cool robe, from behind which her seductively long legs brazenly peek out. I live my life as best I can. I've been judged for my lifestyle, of course, but I once made the decision not to resist my desires. That's why my paths went in different directions with the local church rector. He aspired to the sublime, and I epitomized the niche, Arya said and grinned. That's actually something I'd like to talk to you more about. Why do you want to talk about all this? Arya asked. That's a very good question. Are you the first person to ask that? The others chose to join in silently. Mr. Edgar said, you should know that I achieved everything many years ago, a long time ago. I have no need to think about my daily bread. All my worldly questions are solved for 3 generations ahead. When I had achieved all this, I asked myself, what do I want next? It was an excruciatingly difficult question. Usually, when people reach the top, there is a precipitous downward slide afterward. I knew this and feared it. After much agonizing reflection, I found the answers in my soul. I want to know human nature. From that moment on, and my already beautiful life was completely transformed. My wealth became less important. It became important for me to see something in each person that others don't have. My game of determining the best and the worst also comes from this. I wonder how you could have come straight to me. I would have told you right away what each person is like. All my life, I've yet to meet a man who can hear the truth about himself and not run away from it. I've never met anyone like that. I see you're already looking forward to that kind of knowledge, Arya said. You are quite right. People prefer to avoid themselves all the time. I've seen that time and time again, by putting them through various realistic tests. Following the rules of my game, I recently visited the church rector. He told me that you broke his heart and became a sacred wound in his life. Because of this, he cannot become truly holy and lead others to holiness. So the worst person in this village is you. Do you agree with that? Mr. Edgar asked. He was a little worried that the woman might be offended or angry, but Arya remained calm, just as cheerful. But finally Arya exclaimed and clapped her hands together. At last these people have begun to think, albeit with your help. They're finally thinking about who is truly good and who is truly bad. I hope this knowledge will help them to be truly happy. I always said that I was the worst person not only in this village, but in the whole world, Arya said and threw her hands to her sides. And Edgar was surprised. It was the first time he had ever seen a man speak of his unhappy plight with such joy and pride. He decided not to interrupt the lady. In fact, they all want to live like I do every morning, to make themselves beautiful, to put on the most beautiful clothes, to stay at home and fool around all day with breaks to eat good food, drink good wine, and meet only such people who come for real pleasures. They cannot even in their wildest dreams afford my daily life. I am at my lowest standards, and I am also paid generously for it. I have no worries except to look seductive and be in a good mood. That's my shortcoming. Did your church rector, when he was my life partner, truly hate me for it? I realized at that time that I did not have the strength and desire to strive for higher things as he did. Therefore, I did not cling to him and our life together. I let him go to his aspirations of his soul. If he is suffering now, it is because he would like to live his life as I do, but he did not find the strength for it. But he skillfully pretends to be the truest and most honest man in this village, Maria said. Is there anyone you can call the worst person in the village, other than yourself? Edgar decided to clarify, since this was the first time he had encountered such honesty. No, of course not. They're all good people. The other thing is me. I think I'm the worst person in the world because of the way I live my life. And the proof of that is the fact that I'm also proud of it and not pretending to be different from who I really am, Arya said. This interesting conversation went on for quite some time, and Edgar was quite surprised. He had met 1,000 different people in his life, but he had not met someone like this woman very often. On his way home, he met Freddie. He asked about the results of the experiment. Secretary Edgar, how's your research coming along? We need to determine who will guard the chapel as soon as possible, he said. I'm afraid your expectations will fail. The man who, by your standards, has turned out to be the worst of you is not fit to guard the chapel. She's a promiscuous woman. She's admitted it herself. But why not a teacher? Why not a priest? Why not a cop? Or even Norman? Freddie asked in surprise. Because they don't recognize themselves as such. And as long as a man thinks someone else is bad, he doesn't see the bad part of himself. That was my personal theory, and once again it was confirmed. And the results will be quite surprising to you. Mr. Edgar said. That was the end of his experiment. Now he knows everything about the inhabitants of this village, and the worst of them is the unremarkable Rasputin, a woman who lives on the outskirts of the village. But that's the crowd's version. Meanwhile, Iris has only been in hospital for 3 days. Norman was away on a business trip that day. And Iris decided not to say anything about what had happened so that her husband would not worry. But she didn't tell Eric anything about it. He was worried that his stepmother would get into trouble with his father. That's why all these 3 days did not leave the door of the hospital, taking care of stepmother. Through anger and hatred for her, the address was written out the day before Norman came home. She greeted her husband as if nothing had happened. Only Eric avoided seeing his father. He stayed out of his sight for days, and when he finally calmed down, he decided to continue his offensive toward his stepmother, to get rid of her. That afternoon, it was just the two of them at home again. Iris was busy with household chores. She now became very careful, does not enter the room where Eric is sitting, trying to stay on the first floor of the house so that in case of danger to escape, someone knocked on the gate, and since she went to open it, in front of her stood Mr. Edgar. What an unexpected encounter. Hello. If you remember, you and I are neighbors. My name is Mr. Edgar. Yes, of course I remember. How could anyone forget you? It came out of Iris' mouth. If you'll allow me, I'd like to be your guest for a while. Is that possible? Mr. Edgar asked kindly. Yes, of course. Come in. We are not at home, but his son and I are. By the way, Eric is also interested in your achievements and biography. And before I knew it, I was floating in front of this gentleman. At home, Mr. Edgar carefully examined the situation, periodically asked different questions, and I was surprised by the curiosity of this man. It was said about him that he had a cool disposition and a very unpredictable character. And now he was acting like one of the most typical people in this village. As for Eric's interest, Iris certainly embellished a bit. He was just as skeptical as his father that a legendary millionaire, a scandalously famous man, was their new neighbor. And when Eric learned that he had thought up some kind of experiment among the residents, and the winner guaranteed $1,000, he laughed it all, considering it for nonsense. Hearing the conversation in the living room, Eric decided to go downstairs and see who had come to see them. Seeing Mr. Edgar, Eric was a little displeased. "Eric Nelson, I've heard a lot about you, kid. How you doing? Why don't you come sit down and talk to us? Let's get to know each other like buddies." Edgar said hello. "What brings you here?" "I like to meet new people. I thought I'd drop by. I was told there were some wonderful people living here," Edgar said. "Well, they lied to you. I can tell you the truth. There are no great people here. My father lives here, who left his wife and 3 children and left home. His young wife lives here, a former model and a bit of an actress in life. She is, in fact, sitting in front of you. It's also where myself and Norman's no-good son live. A drunk, a spoiled bully, and a rebel. Which one of us is the most wonderful? So don't believe these people from our village," said Eric. "Do I like you, boy? That's what they told you about that too. Besides, most of your fellow villagers think you are the first candidate for the worst person in this village. Is it encouraging that you know the truth?" Mr. Edgar grinned. "In fact, you've been up to an idiotic thing. I know you actually have other goals in mind. At the very least, you want to turn all the residents against each other, and none of them are getting any of the $1 million. Now, I don't understand why you're doing this. If you were a woman, I'd be sympathetic. Only women are interested in such things," Eric said. Iris felt embarrassed that Eric was being so insolent toward such an important man. Edgar noticed it too. "Eric, you're free to think as you see fit, but my truth remains the truth. You'll see, someone will get $1 million from me, and I'll do it in front of everyone else, and someone else will have to watch and care for the old chapel all year. Could it be you? I'm ready to get started today, because I know how to solve this trifling problem once and for all. Tomorrow morning, these people will have the ruins of their chapel again." "Now that's the normal solution," Eric said. As much as Mr. Edgar tried to build a dialogue, he failed to connect with Eric. In all likelihood, the other residents are right. This Tarek is really unfixable, he thought, while he looked at Iris carefully and pondered Eric's words. The former model is a bit of an actress. Should be an interesting match for a little fling. Such a thought flashed through his mind, but he quickly switched to other conversations. It was a very ordinary family evening in Norman's household, and Iris was setting the table. Eric woke up. Recently, Norman wanted to talk to his son, but he promised that all the talk would be later, and Eric himself, out of habit, rushed to his friends, who had already planned entertainment for that night. But that was just an excuse, or tonight he had important business to attend to, and he did not intend to be distracted by entertainment. As Norman and Iris sat at the table, someone knocked on the door. Iris went to open the door. In front of her stood a middle-aged man of tall stature, stylishly dressed and smelling good. He was holding a bouquet of flowers and a large box with a ribbon. "Hello, darling. It's okay that I came to see you so unexpectedly." "Really, I called at night, and you didn't pick up," said the strange man. Then put his arm around Iris's waist and kissed him vigorously on the lips. "Excuse me, who are you?" asked Iris, when with difficulty managed to get out of the strange man's embrace. "Yes, stop pretending. Or is this some kind of game?" "Well, if you're getting me into the game, then I don't mind at all. I know how good you are in different roles," says the man, and again with a kiss, and Iris pushed him away with difficulty. "Men, I don't know you. Leave me alone and go away." She resented him. "I understand. Baby, you missed me. Is it okay for a sweet little thing like you to be cranky? You said so yourself on the phone." And then she got mad. She wanted to yell at the man, but he's unpredictable. His behavior clearly raises a lot of questions. The struggle went on for quite some time. The unfamiliar man would not admit to being a stranger. When Norman heard shouting and cursing, he also left the house. Turns out that's what this is all about. "Hello, Mr. Norman. And Iris, dear. Now I can see why you've been so angry. But I think it's time we told your husband the truth. How long can you and I hide? Says the man. Norman, I don't know him. This is the first time I've seen this man. Please don't take his word for it. I have nothing with him. And Iris was almost crying. The more Iris explained herself, the more insolent the strange man behaved. He tried to keep her close, to hold her in his arms and press her against him. Norman saw that in the strange man's hands was a bouquet of Iris's favorite flowers and a box of red, just the way she likes it. I don't understand you. What do you want in my house? Norman was trying to figure out what was even going on. The thing is, Iris and I love each other. I've been telling her to come clean for a long time, but she feels sorry for you. She thinks you'll figure it out and let her go. It's a good thing you saw for yourself. You shouldn't have any questions now, the strange man said. No, none of this is true. This is the first time I've ever seen this man, screamed Iris, and she was almost hysterical. Norman stood there in complete incomprehension. I got it right. Iris is very afraid of you. I will leave you both to accept the new reality. Mr. Norman, I hope you don't see the woman you and I love. And with you, my dear, we'll call you in the next few days, said the stranger. The man left his gifts on the threshold and left leisurely. Turning the corner, the strange man took out his cell phone and dialed a number. Eric, buddy. Mission accomplished. Cool. You made all this up. You should have seen the look in your stepmom's eyes. I think she's gonna get a good kick out of your father. He was almost on edge, but as a well-mannered man, he could barely control himself, said the strange man. Rome, you have an underrated acting talent, and I've always believed in you. Thanks, buddy. Now come on, get a cab, and come to us. Is your reward waiting for you? Eric answered him. Old man Edgar called Freddie to his house again today. He hadn't been in the village for a long time. Now he decided to make up for lost time. It seems that you and I have some important business to attend to. Gather all the villagers. I have something to tell them, Edgar said. Hearing the new invitation, the villagers hurried back to Igor's house. Of course, the rich table and the exquisite treats were interesting to them. But even more interesting, who did Edgar decide to appoint as the worst person? Who is the one who will now carry the stigma of disgrace for an entire year? Every resident is sure that Edgar made his decision with exactly his advice in mind. When the whole village gathered and enjoyed the rich treats, with these, Mr. Edgar again asked for everyone's attention. If you remember, I was announcing a little experiment. I have gathered you here today to summarize the preliminary results. I have found that there are no sinless among you. Some of you have brought me lists of bad people. Some of you have come to me several times to convince me of your vision. Some of you I myself have personally gone to and tested how bad you are. Before I announce my decisions, I would like to ask you to express your guesses as to which of you will hold the title of the worst man in the village. Mr. Edgar added more intrigue. The guests glanced amongst themselves. Mr. Edgar looked at each of them, waiting for them to respond. But no one was in a hurry to offer an opinion. Come on in, maybe you have an opinion. Mr. Edgar turned to one of the most active participants in his experiment. Mr. Edgar, I have lived in this village for over 20 years, and I know everyone. Each of them has their own faults and virtues. I think each of my fellow villagers is well aware of their peculiarities. I believe that I have no right to interfere in such aspects of their lives, so I have nothing to add. Freddie said. Mr. Edgar nodded his head approvingly. He had conducted such experiments many times before. He knew for a fact that the participants would say different words depending on the situation. Freddie, for example, he was one of the most active participants who brought whole blacklists. And when all these people were gathered around the same table, he very politely recanted his words. Father, perhaps you have something to say. As the spiritual leader of this community, you know more than anyone. Do you think there is a fault in people or some of the unpleasant things that are happening in our community? Is it the work of the devil himself? Mr. Edgar turned to the priest. The priest was clearly not ready for a frank conversation at the table. Both good and bad come from the man himself. If he has a connection with the Lord God, then of course his thoughts will be pure. But if a person has not gone off the right path and has turned down the path of sin, then shame and dishonor will not escape him. Our Lord guaranteed that bad deeds will be hidden from his eyes. He promised to help spread the glory in every way possible until the person himself began to tell others about them. And our good deeds, following that, I would prefer to remain in the shadows, the priest said. The man once more confirmed Mr. Edgar's supposition. Before, why don't I see Mrs. Area among the guests? Asked Mr., remembering the beautiful mature woman leading a Rasputina lifestyle. The priest shuddered. He was worried that this millionaire for fun and laughter might tell his dramatic story with this Rasputina woman. He perked up, looking around. Freddie was also taken aback, but not confused. Minister Edgar, Aria's companion, said she had other plans for tonight. But she promised that she would be sure to visit you at the first opportunity, Freddie said. After that, Freddie and the priest looked at each other. The priest nodded his head slightly. That meant that he would not be indebted. No one knew that the priest had set a condition for Aria not to attend this evening. Therefore, Freddie had not even informed her of Mr. Edgar's invitation. It was further proof of the man's hypocrisy, but she remained out of Mr. Edgar's sight. Instead, he abruptly changed the topic of conversation and turned his attention to the treats for the guests. The crowd, which had been curiously awaiting the name Shame, Nika, was left bewildered. Apparently, it would have to wait a while longer for the name of that unfortunate man to be announced. The guests ate, drank, talked among themselves, amused themselves. From the outside, one would have thought that the villagers had no grievances against each other. As the evening drew to a close, one of the guests lost patience. Minister Edgar, we've already guessed that you've invited us here for an important occasion. We know you're going to announce the name of the unfortunate one who was the worst of us. What is your choice? Who have you determined to be the best? The man asked. That's a good question. I was expecting it, Edgar said, and rose from his seat. He walked around the long table where all his neighbors were sitting. Every guest's gaze was fixed on him. This is not the first time I have conducted an experiment here. As you know, I am a very wealthy man. I buy houses in different cities and towns. Among them, there are gated elite areas, and there are youth neighborhoods. They are located in different countries. Every time I settle in a new place, I organize some miracle contest. And you know, every time, the results are exactly the same. They're similar even in the smallest details. Is that interesting to you? Or should we stop here? Mr. Edgar stopped and asked the guests. The guests expressed their willingness to listen to him further. They still had not given up hope of hearing the name of the worst man among them. Each one of them was sure that it was definitely not him. Meanwhile, Mr. Edgar continued his story. So let it be known to all of you that he came to me with a list of the worst people, each and every one of you. And let it be known that each and every one of you has been repeatedly listed by others as the worst person. So there is no point in singling out a particular person. The point of my experiment is for you to realize that no one is a saint. You should also remember that there is always someone who is against you. I don't know what you should do with this knowledge, but you must always remember that from another's point of view, each of you stands on the same level, said Mr. Edgar. And who will guard the chapel? Asked one of the guests. That's for you to decide. How did you usually do it before? Mr. Edgar asked. The guests became sad at first, and then even a little indignant. They came here for the spectacle. And to them, this man read them a moral. Mr. Edgar noticed the mood of the crowd. To lighten the mood, he asked his servants to bring a new batch of fine food and good wine. But the guests were no longer as lively as they had been at the beginning of the evening. When dessert was served, Mr. Edgar again asked for the audience's attention. As you know, that was only the first part of the contest. There is still a second part. Now I am waiting for your feedback on the best person among you. And it's gonna be even more exciting than it was before. And remember, you only have 30 days. You may not nominate yourself as the best person. It has to be another person from this village, the one the others say is the best. In exactly 30 days, $1 million will come out of my hands right in front of your eyes. Are you ready? Mr. Edgar turned to the audience. The guests looked at each other and thought again. What a challenge. This time Iris didn't attend the dinner party at Mr. Edgar's house. Those were not the easiest days of her life. After a strange man visited unexpectedly with a bouquet of flowers and gifts, Norman had many questions for his young wife. Barely escorting the annoying stranger out, they both returned to the house as soon as they crossed the threshold. Iris began to explain herself. Norman, honestly, this is the first time I've seen this man. Do you really think I'm capable of treason? I don't know what that person wanted, but I certainly had nothing to do with it. Norman was silent for a long time in response. If he had been passionately watching the news on television before, now all his thoughts were occupied with something else. He did not respond to his wife's words, only stared thoughtfully at one point. I suppose this man could have mixed up the address, said in a quiet voice as she tired of her husband's heavy silence. It's possible to mix up an address, but damn it, he knows you. He brought your favorite peonies and the sweets you love. How do you explain that to me? Norman finally gave it up. I can't explain it. If you believe me, then help me understand this situation, said Iris. Many people told me that my young wife might be cheating on me. I've dismissed such nonsense every time. But for some reason in my life, more and more facts hint at something bad, said Norman. Who's telling you these things? Maybe these people have set such a trap for me. Why didn't you tell me that in the first place? And what facts are you talking about? I've cheered up. Never mind all that. In fact, I've been wanting to talk to you about my son for a long time. I overheard you and him talking the other day. You were talking about some kid. Then I overheard you talking about something very personal. What is that supposed to mean? Norman exploded. You heard a snippet of our conversation about Eric's friend's girlfriend. Your son Eric tells me all the time about the adventures of his friends. This time he relayed that his friend Jeffrey doesn't know what to do with his friend who got him pregnant. Jeffrey, who's a frequent visitor. That's who we were talking about. Do you have any more questions? Iris shuddered with anger at her husband. Why do you have so many private conversations with him anyway? I'm just trying to keep up a polite dialogue with him. He tells me stories. I share my opinions. You barely talk to him at all. You just give him commands. The rest of the time, you pay him off with money. Didn't you think the boy needed your support and company? Why should I support your relationship? Yesterday, Iris finally came clean. He's not a boy. He's 23 years old, and he's about to become the manager of my company. He's not a girl to be handled and listened to all the time. And I give him enough money to make him feel free. He needs to make connections. He needs to find his place in a certain circle where money is very important. Any other questions? Now Norman exploded. I was very offended. That you thought ill of me and my son. Do you even hear what you're accusing me of? Said Iris. How am I supposed to think when a strange man comes straight to my house with gifts and kisses you on the lips? What else am I supposed to think? The verbal altercation turned into a long family scandal. When the spouses were tired of yelling at each other, Norman decided to end the conversation. Now, my dear, I'm giving you 3 days' time. During that time, you and I will not discuss or fight. During that time, you will think hard about how you and I are going to proceed. Either I have to stop getting facts that compromise you, or you have to make a choice, Norman said. What do you mean, make a choice? Iris asked. It means you're going to choose either me or that strange man. So you're suggesting that I break up with you. We can break up because you don't believe what I say, and you believe whoever you want. Iris asked, through tears, and if you want that not to happen, then please give me a reasonable explanation for what's going on, not empty excuses. I'm done. And by the way, which one of us is sleeping in the living room? You or me, said Norman last. I said Iris quietly. When Eric suddenly ran out of money at the restaurant, he was a little upset. The task turned out to be quite unfortunate. He was just about to take his friends to a nightclub after the restaurant. It would take a decent amount of money. So he turned to his friend Jeffrey. How about you pay for everyone tonight? And tomorrow I'll pay you the full amount for the movie, Eric asked. I'm sorry, buddy, but you know I don't have that kind of money. Besides, you invited everybody. You're going to have to do a lot of work yourself, my friend said. Are you right? I don't have any money on me. We'll have to go home. Tell the girls we're going out for a while. Have them wait for us here, and you and I will go to my house, said Eric. After half an hour, Eric and Jeffrey sneaked into the house. They didn't know that Iris was lying down in the living room. Eric carefully opened his father's safe, while Jeffrey stood in the hallway. After a few moments, Jeffrey turned to his friend. Eric, I feel like I'm being drawn to sleep. Do you have any coffee? Let's have a quick drink. It's going to be a little hard to drive, said his friend. Now they moved into the kitchen. The kitchen and the living room are separated by a thin partition, so even whispers can be heard from here. When the coffee was ready, the boys sat down at the table and chatted among themselves in whispers. So is your father still hung up on that woman? Jeffrey asked. Unfortunately, yes, but it won't last long. Your advice didn't work. I came up with a cool way to do it myself. Last week, I approached Roma with a bouquet of flowers and gifts, so he could pretend to be my stepmom's lover. And that's when my dad was home, Eric said. Wow, you're a genius, man. So, what are the results? Your dad probably kicked her out the door, asked Jeffrey with a chuckle. What's the matter with her? She's still hanging around. I think she managed to convince my father of her sainthood. We'll have to do it again in the next few days. Then she won't stand a chance, Eric said. Then they stoked their coffee, turned off the light, and quietly closed the door behind them. Neither of them even realized that Iris was lying just behind the partition during this time in agonizing thoughts about her position in this family. After the boys left and Iris got up from her seat and lit a cigarette in the kitchen, she was calm now. A brilliant idea popped into her head, how to come out of this situation victorious. She decided to spring into action tomorrow. Mr. Edgar had taken a few days' leave to devote to his neighbors, who would come with suggestions for the best man among them. He remembers the last time he had to determine the worst. Several people came to him every day. He thought it would be the same this time. For the first 3 days, no one came. Then Mr. Edgar went to Freddie and asked if everyone was okay. Freddie wondered, why such questions? Has everyone forgotten that $1 million is at stake? I'm waiting for the candidates, said Mr. Edgar. Is that what you mean? I don't even know why no one comes. Freddie shrugged. Well, Freddie yourself, who would you say is the best person among your neighbors, relatives, friends, and fellow villagers? I'm sure you have some, Mr. Edgar said. I can't think of any. Think back. Maybe you've had some rough times in your life. Someone reached out to you. Someone gave you a kind word of encouragement. Just one person. Minister Edgar insisted. No, I don't remember anyone like that. Mr. Edgar, I grew up an orphan. I made it on my own. Built my own house, planted my own garden, bought my own van, started my own farm. Of course, there were many times I wished there was someone in my life who could solve all my problems, or not solve all the problems. But to come along and say, Freddie, you take a couple weeks off and enjoy yourself, and I'll do it for you. That's a big deal. No, that never happened, Freddie replied. Are you saying that all the people around you are indifferent? Mr. Edgar asked. Mr. Edgar, why do you like to ask such meticulous questions? Are people as they are, and is it unfair to divide them into good or bad? I mean, the same person can be different from one person to the next. Sometimes he can act like the ultimate scoundrel. Sometimes he can act like a wise man. Do you really think your stupid experiment is going to do anyone any good? I think you're just doing this nonsense because you've got nothing else to do. Freddie got mad. You mean Freddie? I don't really have anything else to do, so I study people. And the results of my experiment will not go to waste. I'm writing my book, and in it I'm describing all sorts of silly things in your language. You know what's interesting? You were the most active last time, weren't you? Why are you criticizing my experiments now? Mr. Edgar asked. I don't know. Maybe because it all annoys me. If your money bothers you, you could give it away for nothing. What do you care who or what anyone thinks of the man? Or are you just gonna bluff Freddie? No, he's not bluffing. There are already several people who have gotten their 1 million out of my hands. There's been a lot of press about it. You can look it up. But it's too bad you're not participating this time. Too bad, said Mr. Edgar, and headed leisurely to his home. Over the next few days, Mr. Edgar went around to all the neighbors with the same question. Who do you think is a good person? It was as if the neighbors were all in agreement. They refused to discuss the subject, and when Mr. Edgar asked them if their reluctance to talk might be due to shame for having slum mud at many of their acquaintances last time, some of them threw him out of their homes. Minister Edgar was used to such displays, so he took no offense. But not everything was so hopeless. After he was kicked out of the church by the minister, he was caught up on his way home by that nice and sweet neighbor Iris. Mr. Edgar, if you're not in a hurry, listen to me. Is there someone I can tell you about? Said he as he ran after him. Well, that's interesting. Come on, let's go home, said Mr. Edgar, and they came to his well-maintained yard where there were wooden gazebos, and Iris was the first to speak. I am aware that you have announced the second part of your experiment. Is that correct? Do you have someone to praise? Asked the old man. Yes, I have someone to praise. The best man in our village is called Eric. He is my husband's son. True, Eric is a bit spoiled, but he has a pure soul and pure thoughts. Choose him as the winner. You won't regret it, Iris said. I suppose so. And how can you justify such a flattering characterization of your stepson? Mr. Edgar asked. And then Iris wondered. All she remembered about her stepson was his dirty molestations, provocations, threats, and even his latest setup with a strange man. She doesn't remember anything else he did. But now we have to answer the old man's question somehow. You know, I don't really have anything to back that up. I just don't think Eric's personality is quite there yet. He's got his best stuff dormant inside of him. And if you give him a little push, everything will fall into place. My stepson will bring out his best, Iris said. Well, have I written down your feedback? Let us now wait until the end of the appointed time, replied Mr. Edgar lastly. After this conversation, Iris had a nice chat with the millionaire for some more time and then went back home. True, neither of them guessed that their conversation had been inadvertently overheard by someone in the immediate neighborhood. The news that the agitated son of the unloved Norman was claiming to be the best man quickly spread among the residents. Victor, the first to hear about it, was Freddie. He couldn't stand Norman's son. When he imagined that this pompous guy would be called the best, he lost his temper. He wanted to go to Norman's house right now and tell him what the others thought of him. But before that, he decided to catch Eric in something unflattering, so that everyone else would be convinced of the unfairness of Edgar's decision. He began to prepare his intrigues. Meanwhile, the teenagers, the youth of the village, had also learned the news. The young lady's eyes lit up, and the young men nodded approvingly. As the youths sat on a bench along the road, Eric was just about to go to another evening of entertainment. Hey, Eric, you're awesome. Way to go, shouted one of them as he drove by. Eric didn't pay any attention to this remark, but just nodded his head in gratitude. A couple more days later, Eric was strolling down the main street of Istok. His path crossed with a local priest who was in a hurry to get to church. The priest remembered that this guy was a contender to be the best and decided to encourage him. Eric, you're doing great. Your father must be proud of you. "You're such a nice guy," he said as he walked by. Eric nodded his head, but in the back of his mind he wondered a little what had happened to his neighbors. Usually, they didn't even say hello. And here the compliments of admiration one after another. The cop who surprised him the most was the one who came running in from a distance and shook his hand. "Eric, I always believed in you. You're a good man. We need people like you in our society. You'll see, soon the young people will start to follow your example. See if their morals improved," said the cop. Eric was definitely in a reverie now. It was as if the neighbors and the villagers were in cahoots. But he was quite pleased with this attitude. All day long he walked in high spirits. And the next day, as he walked down the street, without noticing it, he began to greet everyone first. And old Betty even invited him into her house and treated him to pies, which she only drank. When Iris called her friend, she was reading a sad novel and periodically sighed heavily. The misunderstanding in her relationship with Norman had taken a great toll on her. Of course, he didn't bring up the breakup again, but a cold wall had formed between them. Her friend had decided to support her today. "Iris, but how are you still sad there, or everything is getting better?" asked her friend Catherine. "It seems to have gotten better, but it's not the same. I think Norman is harboring doubts in his soul. I do not know how to influence it, so I am sad. To be honest, I'm tormented between two men," she sighed. "What's the matter with Eric? He still oppresses you, and you can't tell his father anything so as not to ruin their relationship?" Catherine asked. "Speaking of Eric, things are about to change. Remember, I told you that we have a new neighbor, a weirdo, a millionaire. He promised $1 million to whoever was chosen to be the best man in the village. I went to him and told him that Eric was the best man." Iris grinned. "What do you mean he's the best man when he's a drunk and a bully? And anyway, what did he do to deserve such happiness as a free $1 million? Catherine wondered. "It's very simple. If he's lucky, Eric will get this money, and the first thing he will do is to get away from his father. He will want to buy a house and live separately, and then he will want to organize his business separately from his father. The business is fine. He's not really into it anyway. He's agreeing to inherit it purely for the money," Iris said. "Well, if that's the case, of course. Don't you have a chance of getting that $1 million yourself?" Catherine asked. "I don't think so. To get it, I'd have to have someone else give me that kind of feedback, and no one here knows me. The ones who do know me quietly hate me. I don't know why. But I could certainly do something else if I wanted to," Iris said. The conversation went on for a long time, but the subject of money was never mentioned again. The last few days had been very meaningful for Eric. Active attention and recognition at every turn. It had changed his outlook on life and people dramatically. In just a few days, he had noticed how many interesting and friendly people there were among these neighbors. He even began to feel shy deep down. That before he had always considered them petty people and disdained them. Now Eric could calmly linger on the street for a conversation with another neighbor. He could safely go to any of them in the house, sit at the same table. He liked that very much. Suddenly Eric felt that he also wanted to do something nice for these people. The first such person was an old lady-to-be. Eric specially set aside a free day to fix the old lady's old furniture. True, he had never done such a thing before. But the old lady herself helped him with hints, and when the business was over, she treated him to her delicious pie again. At parting, the old woman patted the boy on the shoulder and blessed him with good luck. Eric experienced such pleasant feelings for the first time in his life. A couple of days later, he wanted to feel this state again. He started looking for someone to help him with some things. A priest came to mind. When Eric arrived at the church, he was tidying up the yard. Eric asked him to sit on a bench while he hauled all the leather hay to the back of the church. When the job was done, the priest blessed him for good luck too. Then he invited the boys into the cellar, where they drank simple herbal tea. The priest told Eric different parables that made the guy think even more. Freud. Meanwhile, Every day he asked Mr. Edgar about the results of the experiment. He was looking for a way to foil Iris's plans to keep Eric from becoming the best man in Freddy's village. 1,000 times I regretted that I had written so many complaints about almost every one of my neighbors in the first phase. I should have left at least one alone. Now that one could have been listed as the best, if that one had won 1 million from the old man, it would be split in half. Brady was doubly angry at his stupidity, and when he found out that the second candidate never showed up, with only a few days to go before the end of the experiment, he got into everything. Constant drinking. And today she decided to try once again to return the former warm attitude of her husband. She cooked his favorite dish, put on her best dresses, organized a romantic setting, and called her husband. "Darling, so much has happened between us lately. I'm asking you to try to come home early tonight. I want us to have a romantic dinner," she said. "I can't promise you anything as I have important things planned for today. I'll probably be late." Dryly, Norman replied. The conversation ended very quickly. Norman hung up the phone and thought. Since his wife was trying to win back his favor, she must have something to be ashamed of. The detectives, of course, found nothing suspicious in Iris's lifestyle, but still she was only to blame for allowing a situation in which he had to question her fidelity. Norman thought his deception about important business for the evening was correct. But in fact, he had no important business to attend to. He had purposely decided not to have dinner together, so that Iris would be tormented as long as possible, and henceforth would not even think of breaking relations with him. Let this be a lesson to her for a long time, Norman thought. Meanwhile, the day of announcing the winners of Edgar's experiment was approaching. Everyone awaits this day with curiosity. Traditionally, on this day, Edgar would set a lavish table, serving the best wines and the most exquisite dishes. His neighbors didn't doubt it until they saw the sign on Edgar's gate and the sale of his house. Did our neighbor decide to move out? He didn't like it here. Where's he gonna move to? What's gonna happen to his experiment? Was it really a hoax? Were the neighbors whispering amongst themselves? "Oh no, I've never cheated anyone in my life. It'll be just as I promised you," Mr. Edgar himself said. About that. Indeed, on the appointed day, everyone showed up except the Norman family. Eric was busy that day with his charity projects he had recently launched. Norman decided to intentionally stay late at work, and Iris waited faithfully for him. The guests feasted on gourmet food, drank good wine, and marveled at Eric for not coming to such an important event for him. In the middle of the evening, Mr. Edgar asked for the audience's attention. "You all know the occasion for which we are gathered here. I don't want to keep you waiting. I've already sold this house to a good man. He'll be moving in any day now. And I'm leaving your pleasant company, for my experiment has achieved its purpose. I know who is the best man among you," said Mr. Edgar, and started walking around the table again. "Eric, of course. Eric, this has long been known. But the lad is worthy. He's changed in a good way. Ever since the rumors started, the guests have been whispering about it. And that person is Mrs. Iris. It's a pity she didn't come. But I'll be sure to stop by before I leave and give her the money," Mr. Edgar said, and asked one of his bodyguards to show him the suitcase with the money. There was indeed real money in it, neatly stacked in a row. The guests were in such deep surprise, as they knew nothing about this woman. And this woman did not know that she had been chosen as the winner of this contest. 2 days later, early in the morning, Norman found a tiny note on the kitchen table from his wife, saying that she was leaving for Mr. Edgar and divorcing him.